All right, we are going live.
Good.
All right, fantastic. And I see that folks are jumping in to our Zoom meeting, which is great.
408, 433.
Yeah, let's let it increase. This is great to see the interest, and thanks to everyone who is jumping on with us. We're up to just over 700 participants. That's my dog chiming in, sorry.
That's all right.
Look at this, we're gonna get to 1,000 quick.
Yeah, I think we might. This is good. This is a good, good to see the interest and involvement.
Unfortunate topic, but
Yeah, correct.
most attended Council Rock School Board meeting ever, I believe.
Mr. Frederickson, good move in expanding our capacity on Zoom.
What's the maximum?
3,000.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't 3,000 this morning, but it is now. All right, fantastic. I am going to go ahead and get started as folks continue to join us and jump into the meeting. We are just over 1,000 participants at the moment. We are going to bypass an official call to order. And Mr. Block, could I ask you to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag.
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, fantastic. So I do want to again thank everyone for being here, welcome you to this virtual meeting. This is our special forum to discuss the reopening of our Council Rock schools. As seen by the over 1,000 attendees that we have and rising, this is clearly an exceptionally important topic, top of mind for all of us for good reason. It's an increasingly complex topic, and it's a topic which has become quite divisive. And I think that's unfortunate because ultimately, at the end of the day, we all care about our CR kids and want to do right by them.
Hey, Dr. Frazier.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm noticing here on the attendees list, we've got a couple hands up. And I think from a logistics standpoint, it's worth letting the entire audience know that we are not enabled to take your questions live. So that we're not ignoring the fact that blue hands are up. We just don't have the capability. We were Zoom bombed in our first meeting and disabled that capability. So if you do have questions that you don't hear the answers to tonight, please send those to reopening@crsd.org and also check the website in the FAQ. I'm sure Dr. Frazier will go after all that, but all those blue hands up there, we will not be able to engage directly with you this evening.
Thanks, Mr. Block. Appreciate jumping in on that. And yeah, we fielded, we've received several questions, and we're going to answer as many as we can after we go through a couple presentations here. Obviously, we're here to discuss our draft health and safety plan. I do want to emphasize that when we plan from a health and safety standpoint, our focus is on our students, and our focus is also on the health and safety of our staff. Several of our staff members, as you might imagine, and for a variety of reasons, are considered high risk from a COVID-19 standpoint. These are valued colleagues. These are pillars in our community, and we must and we will also do what we can to protect them while also protecting our students. And while we prioritize health and safety, we also remain cognizant of simply the realities that our families are facing. It's hard, for instance, for many parents to work when schools are closed. We understand that. The same holds true for us. So we've completed the first draft of the Council Rock School District Health and Safety Plan. You've had a chance to review that, and we've completed this first draft with all of the above in mind. And of course, also a plan that's consistent with the medical advice and guidance that we've received. You know that we've received guidance from a variety of sources, and much of that guidance, quite frankly, conflicts with each other, which has been a bit frustrating at times. In working on this health and safety plan, the Pennsylvania Department of Education asked school districts like ours to work with our local health officials, and that's exactly what we've done. The Bucks County Health Department, and in particular its director, Dr. David Damsker, has been instrumental in navigating us and all 13 school districts in Bucks County through this pandemic. Dr. Damsker has talked with county superintendents really on a weekly basis, twice a week for virtually every week since late February. And this evening, I thank Dr. Damsker for being with us to help us answer questions, because our plan does rely heavily on the guidance that he and the Bucks County Health Department have provided to the district. And we look forward to walking everyone through that plan here this evening. Now, what's not on the agenda tonight? We won't be talking this evening about what teaching and learning will look like for students who will remain at home in the fall. That said, please know that we are only 1 week away from doing so. We do have a joint committee meeting scheduled for 1 week from tonight on the 16th, 7 o'clock, also via Zoom, and that is when we will weave the at-home learning portion into the discussion. I will note now that the at-home learning plan that we're working on does absolutely prioritize the reality that more students are going to miss days from school this year than they normally do. And so our priority is on ensuring that students can seamlessly transition from learning in school to learning from home when they need to be out for one reason or another. And next week, we'll also discuss what at-home learning will look like for all students in the event that we need to close schools at any point during the school year, whether that's for a day, a week, 14 days, a month. Hopefully we don't reach that point, but if we do, we will also talk about that plan. And one other note before we get started, we referenced some of the emails that have come in with questions and comments, and thank you, by the way, for those. Very helpful, and we will work hard to answer as many as we can. One of the topics that's been brought up is asking about a hybrid model, where, say, half of students attend in person for a couple of days, and then the other half of students attend in person for the next couple of days. And in this kind of hybrid model that you probably read about or heard about, approximately half of students would be learning from home on any given day, and the other half in school on any given day. So please know a couple things about a hybrid plan. One is that we are building a hybrid plan. And two is that we really don't intend to implement this kind of hybrid plan unless we need to. And we might need to. That's just the reality of it. There's no way to know. If we start to see greater community spread, then that might push us in that direction. Likewise, if guidelines from medical professionals begin to change, especially regarding social distancing, then we might also need to move into this hybrid concept. And importantly, I should also note that as we're all here this evening, there is currently, as I speak, a real lack of clarity from PDE as to whether a hybrid model would actually be eligible to be counted from a school code standpoint for the minimum required number of student days and hours. So that piece is an unknown right now and does stop us as just one more reason to stop us from going straight in to that sort of model. All right, so our draft plan, as you know, it's based on a minimum of 3 feet of social distancing. We have measured our classrooms with desks actually 4 feet apart from the center of one desk to the center of the next desk. Doing this shows that in Council Rock overall, K to 12, all 14 of our schools, we can fit about 88% of our students in our schools using that 4 feet of social distancing. Of course, that figure is going to naturally break down differently from school to school and from grade to grade. And naturally, we will be able to fit more students if we would move to 3 feet and less students if we would move to 5 feet or 6 feet. So why are we talking about 4 feet? Given that our guidelines say 3 feet. It's because in the survey that we just conducted, about 85% of parents said that their children are likely to return to school in September based upon what they knew at that time. So again, 88% capacity, 85% of parents are indicating that their children are likely to return. So we will adjust. It will look different classroom to classroom naturally. But right now we're going with that 4 foot barometer. Now, we did get those survey results, and of course that survey was conducted prior to the announcement from the state that face coverings are required. So that certainly might change these numbers when we resurvey. And I also think that numbers might change after next Thursday evening when we present our at-home learning option for parents. It'll be interesting to see. But I think that might impact that number as well. And to that end, and as I just referenced, please know that we will be surveying again, and we are anticipating that survey being sent out next Friday morning, July 17th. So we'll have the joint committee meeting 1 week from tonight. The very next morning, the survey will be sent out. Unfortunately, it does need to be a tight window because we're on a tight timeline. So we'll give a reminder or two leading up to the 17th, and but please do be on the lookout via email for that survey next Friday morning. I do want to remind everyone watching that this plan is a draft. This evening is a point in time in this process. It's July 9th. We're anticipating approval of whatever the plan looks like at that time on July 23rd. This time last week, we didn't know whether the face covering order applied to schools, for instance. And we certainly don't know what the coming days, weeks, and months are going to bring us. So we're currently also waiting on additional guidance from PDE. We hope to have received that already. We haven't. We were told we would have it by Friday at the latest. So perhaps it's coming tomorrow. And that guidance is rumored to include information regarding athletics as well. So it'll be interesting to see when that comes out. The bottom line is that, again, we are at a point in time here this evening. We certainly do not have all of the answers just yet. So do keep in mind that we will be discussing this issue again next week. In fact, expanded to include the instructional component. A vote isn't expected for another week after that. And really, to be perfectly clear, even after July 23rd, we know that conditions are going to change. Guidance, likewise, might change with those conditions. And that certainly might cause some changes to this plan even after July 23rd. So we will be flexible and ask everyone to be flexible with us. I do want to thank the folks who are listed on the screen here. This is our steering team, and in particular, I want to thank our official pandemic team that we needed to name from a PDE standpoint, and that pandemic team is a three-person team. It's Dr. Lambert, Director of Special Services for the district, who you will hear from this evening. Dr. Black, our Supervisor of Special Services, also with us this evening, and Ms. Adamus, our nursing coordinator and also school nurse at Holland Middle. I really thank all three of them for just incredible volume of work and complexity of work. And I also thank the entirety of our steering team and all of our committee members for their time and effort to date, and in advance for much work certainly that is yet to come. So we are going to begin with an overview of the survey results that we recently conducted. As you know, we conducted both parent and staff surveys, and you're going to see as we go through them, and we're going to go through them fairly quickly so that we can get to the plan, but you're going to see that there's a pretty high level of agreement in general between our parents and our staff. And this feedback really is critical to our work. And I'm thankful for very, very high participation rates. We had 90+%, in fact, well in the 90s, participation rates in both surveys. So thank you to parents, thank you to our staff, for everyone who took the time to complete this first survey. So Mr. Frederickson, if we can transition into our survey results, that would be perfect. And the first set of questions here, as you might recall from the survey, was really pertaining directly to the guidelines from Dr. Damsker and from the Bucks County Health Department. So we just wanted to see what was the level of agreement, disagreement, comfortable, not comfortable. And so these are the results. Let me start with two things. One is these are going to show you the bar graphs only without the specific numbers. If you go onto our website to the reopening hub on the main page, you will see that this document is uploaded under a new tab called surveys. And there is also a set of tables in there that are completely numeric based in that. So that's available to all members of the community at this moment. So we'll just talk about these in some general terms. Schools should use 3 feet or 3 foot social distancing guidelines. You can see that most people do agree with that. You have staff represented in that orange and parents represented in blue. Not total agreement. In fact, we have about 25% total who disagreed somewhat or strongly, but that is relative to this about 66% of people who either somewhat agreed or strongly agreed. So again, pretty high level of agreement there. All right, Mr. Frederickson. Next question, and you can see the questions here in this burgundy color. Again, these are the questions pertaining directly to the Bucks County Health Department guidelines. Schools should have a maximum of 2 students per bus seat. With guidance, the students wear a mask on the bus. Again, pretty strong agreement. We're at about 68% between somewhat agree and strongly agree. Once again, you see down here at the bottom that we do have some folks who are disagreeing with that for one reason or another, but overall pretty high level of agreement. Cafeteria, probably the most difficult planning point of all for us. And frankly, probably the biggest area where when I say that we don't have all the answers yet, probably pertains to the cafeteria more than anywhere else. So this piece of guidance, schools should seat students 3 feet apart with no students face to face. Similarly, here you see that that overall there is pretty strong agreement, 63% somewhat or strongly agree. But again, this was when we asked parents and when we asked staff, hey, of all the different portions of the school day, which ones concern you the most? Cafeteria came up number 1 for on both sets, from parents and from our staff. So we know that we have answers to come on this issue. We know that we cannot and that we will not fit all students into the cafeterias. So that plan certainly remains in process at this point. Require students and staff to possess a mask at all times in the event that its use is required. So again, this survey was administered prior to the order that came out last week from Harrisburg, but with or without that order, you see very, very strong agreement to the tune of 88% for parents, even stronger for staff agreeing with that statement. And at the same time, as you look down here, you do see that we do have a component of our community that disagrees somewhat or strongly with that. But overall, you are seeing a level of agreement with those county guidelines. Next, when in populated situations, hallways, etc., we should require students and staff to wear masks. Similar results, strong agreement, about 84%. We have about 6% overall who are strongly disagreeing. So again, we do have a segment of our community who does not agree with that, but you can see by these bars that, especially on the staff end, but including parents as well, that there is a real significant level of agreement here. And then the symptoms check. I was grateful to see these results, to be honest with you. Maybe relieved is the right word, because this would be something that would be enormously difficult logistically for our schools to pull off and keep students socially distanced while doing so. So we are going to be asking parents to symptom check before they come in to school. We will have announcements on a daily basis, and so that'll sort of act as a second check, but the primary one is this. And as you can see, we have a really high level, 89% agreement on that piece. And then trying to limit high volume hallway use. So we talked about wearing masks when in those situations, but doing the best that we can to have one direction hallways, one direction stairwells, stagger class dismissal times. Those are all things that we will be doing. And again, you can see that there is a strong level of agreement here. This one numerically is at just about 86%. So that ends the questions that were directly aligned with the Bucks County Health Department guidelines. So the next thing that we asked on the survey, and this was on the parent survey only, is, okay, so based on what you know at this time, based upon those guidelines, that Dr. Damsker was kind enough to write for us and the other districts, and we made available to parents. Based upon what I know at this time, I am likely to send my child to school in September. This is the figure that I referenced in the opening when I said 85% indicated that they're likely to come back. Again, we'll resurvey and see where that is based upon some of the changes that are happening. This is where that number comes from. To be precise, it's 85.43% between answering yes and probably to that question. And then this next question only went to folks who answered on the previous question, no or probably not, because it wouldn't have been relevant to the other folks. So the sample size of this one is less. So if I answered probably not or no as a parent, I got this question. Otherwise, I didn't get this question. So based upon what I know, I'm likely to have my child participate full-time in the CRSD cyber learning program in September. You see that the vast majority say yes. It's just about 91% who say yes. And then we have a few others who are saying probably not and no. I would ask everyone to stay tuned. And again, next week we will be talking and detailing what that at-home learning experience will be. For students who are at home, we're anticipating it being substantially different from what our students experienced the past few months this spring. So again, as more information becomes available, we'll continue to survey, get reactions, and make decisions accordingly. Okay, Mr. Frederickson. And then this question went to the opposite groups. So if we answered yes or probably to sending my child to school in September, the natural follow-up question is, in doing so, I'm likely to have my child ride the bus to school. And this one, you still see that we're leaning towards yes, but not nearly as much. We have about 70% answering yes, and that leaves us with 30% answering no. And so the breakdown of this will be important ultimately, because we are talking about 2 to a seat. 2 to a seat means 52 on the bus. That's not an issue for us at the middle level or at the high school level. Elementary, of course it is. So just like our classrooms, what will social distancing look like? We have the same question on the school bus. So we'll continue to evaluate this, but based upon the initial survey with that initial information, we had about 30% saying, no, we'll either be driving ourselves or dropping our kids off at school. And then we had a set of questions with prompts that went beyond the Bucks County Health Department guidance. And the reason why we did this is because that first set of questions, so for instance, the first question that we had in the survey was, hey, we should have 3 feet of social distancing. And, you know, of course, we had some people who disagreed with that. And then the question becomes, well, why are they disagreeing with that? Is it because they think there shouldn't be any social distancing, or it could be because they think there should be 6 feet of social distancing? And so these questions, when we cross-reference, are able to flesh some of that out. So this first question, in fact, is exactly that we think it should be 6 feet instead of 3 feet. You can see that opinions here are fairly mixed, slightly tilted in favor of agreeing, especially from a staff standpoint, also true from a parent standpoint, but not lopsided by any stretch of the imagination. So, and again, the exact numbers are posted on the website at this time. Remind you of that. This one, I believe field trips should be held while we are social distancing. You see the vast majority of people disagree, particularly staff. I happen to agree with that, and I do not envision us having field trips as long as we are in a pandemic state, and that is consistent with what's in our plan, and you can see these results here tend to support that. All right. The next two are kind of inverse questions. They're opposites, and the results, you know, come in accordingly. So I believe that a max number of 2 students should sit on the bus with no mask requirement. So two to a seat is not social distancing. Question asked, that would be the case. No mask requirement. You certainly see that there's strong disagreement. It's to the tune of about 74% who are disagreeing. And like I've done before, I will just point out this other contingent of folks who do agree with that. And then the inverse question is, I believe that we should have fewer than 2 kiddos on a bus seat and they should be wearing a mask, and the results are kind of the inverse of the previous question because of the nature of the question. And here we have about 67% on the parent side agreeing and about 20% disagreeing. And for all these, you see that we also have a chunk of folks who neither agree nor disagree at the moment. Okay, cafeteria. I believe the cafeteria seating should be 6 feet apart, no students face to face. Again, very mixed results. Really on the parent side, I mean, almost completely mixed. If you look at those blue bars, and staff side is also mixed, but certainly leaning towards the agree side. So this is one of those questions where there's a little bit of a divergence between staff and parents. But overall, I would consider this to be somewhat in the mixed column. Okay, so then we go on to 2 nitty-gritty questions that were really the extreme questions. So the first was, I am willing to send my children to school with no restrictions in place. So doesn't matter what you do from a mitigation, face covering, social distancing, I'm willing to send my child, let's just act like it was last September, open up business as usual. These are the numbers. You see that, and again, this was a parent-only question. You see that the vast majority disagree. It's about 68% total who disagree. And I will also point out that the folks who are strongly agreeing and somewhat agreeing actually totals up to about 26%. So we also need to be cognizant that that's a full quarter plus of our population who are agreeing with that particular prompt. But clearly the vast majority of our folks do not share that opinion. And then the last question, and sort of the again, an inverse question, is I am not willing to send my children to school until a vaccine is available. Doesn't matter what you do from a social distancing standpoint, whatever your mitigation efforts are, we're not going to be comfortable coming to school. And again, you see that the vast majority of people strongly disagree with that. It's about 73% who disagree. These top 2 areas are 14% who agree. So we do, again, sort of the opposite end of feelings and intentions on this. But we do have this contingency who is saying, hey, we're better off staying at home for one reason or another. So what I take from these last 2 questions, we had strong disagreement on both of them, is our community isn't interested in one extreme or the other. We're looking, we have some mixed results. We're looking to find that right spot in the middle. That's what this plan is attempting to do. We will continue to let it evolve and be refined, but you know, we don't have parents, large contingency asking for one extreme or the other. Folks are asking for something that's realistic in the middle, and hopefully that's the kind of plan that we're drafting. All right, and then to end this, we're going to cross-reference a couple different survey prompts. So these 2 questions, and I'll explain why we do this in a minute. So you've already seen these results. The prompts, you've seen the bars and the percentages. So this question here, based on what I know at this time, I'm likely to send my child to school in September. You already know this is about 85.43% of our folks. Answering no came out to 4.1%. And then we have another percentage, of course, saying probably not. And then we have this question that we just looked at, the most recent question, saying, I'm not willing to send my child until that vaccine is available. So what we're going to do is take a look at this group here who answered no, and try to understand what their thoughts and feelings are around this question in terms of a vaccine. So Mr. Frederickson, if we can go to this next slide. Again, here's that 4.1% of parents who said, no, I'm not going to send my child or children back in the fall. That the representation there, it was 438 students, obviously less parents, multiple kids in many homes, but representing 438 students that they would not be sending their child back to school in September based upon what they know. So taking a look at that 4.1% and looking at how they answered this question, I'm not willing to send my child to school until a vaccine is available, regardless of social distancing and other mitigation efforts. So as you can see here, approximately 80%, 79.7% strongly agree or somewhat agree with that statement. And then on the opposite end, we have 12.8% who strongly disagree or somewhat disagree. So again, we're starting with 438 students. This is an important question for us because we need to know and we want to know, hey, are there things in your opinion that we could do or that we should do that would make it more likely for your child or for your children to come back in person in the fall? And there is some truth to that for about 65 or 56 rather of these 438 students. But again, the vast majority, the answer there is no, it really doesn't matter from a social distancing, from a any other mitigation standpoint. We're not planning on sending our child back. So again, preliminary results. Some information has already changed. Additional information will continue to change, evolve. PDE guidelines are coming again. And so we will continue to be flexible. And again, we will absolutely be issuing a new survey next Friday morning. You will have more information by that time. And we will be looking for your feedback once again to help us through this process. So again, really, really high participation numbers. And I cannot thank our staff. I cannot thank our parents enough for participating. Really valuable part of the process, and certainly hope and ask that that high level rate of participation continues with our next survey. All right, and at this point, we are going to jump into the actual overview of our health and safety plan, and Dr. Lambert, our Director of Special Services, will take the lead in doing so. Dr. Lambert.
Dr. Frazier, mind if I just jump in for another second there?
Please.
I just wanted to note we've got over 2,000 folks on the call, which is terrific, but we still have probably new to the call who didn't hear me at the beginning. We have 8 folks with their hands up. Likely wanting to ask questions. We do not have this capability on this call. We haven't been able to do it since our original Zoom meeting based on the poor behavior of others and not wanting to derail the meeting. So for those of you that do have questions, feel free to send those to reopening@crsd.org. That's reopening@crsd.org, and we will get to those.
Okay, can you hear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Fraser shared with you previously the members of the task force, and I too want to thank them for all the work that went into this. I want to share that our plan was developed with consideration given to recommendations from many, many different organizations that we studied, and also from the survey results that Dr. Fraser just shared with you, and particularly from the information and recommendations from the Bucks County Department of Health. We had many, many meetings of this steering committee, and also many meetings with our building administrators and subgroups of individuals who have a particular interest in certain areas. So we solicited the input of a lot of folks in coming up with this plan. What I'm going to share with you tonight is, if you review the actual plan itself, there are action steps listed in that plan. So I'm going to go over in this PowerPoint the different action steps that are contained. The first area that we look at is cleaning, sanitizing, disinfecting, and ventilating our facilities. In our plan action steps, we will clean and disinfect all high-touch surfaces once a day and as requested during the day, following all regulatory guidelines. This will be done in the evenings by our cleaning crew with disinfectants that are effective with this virus and disinfecting. We will not be allowing the use of water fountains in the buildings. All the fountains will be covered. As a result, each building will have designated areas where students may fill water bottles during the course of the day. The desks that the students will be sitting in will be cleaned by ABM following regulatory guidelines on a daily basis. In addition, we are purchasing a pretty large supply of cleaning supplies that will be provided to the classroom so the desks can be cleaned. We calculated that based on the number of wipes per student per day based on how frequently kids change classes. Each building will come up with a protocol that will be used for doing so. That protocol obviously will differ based on the age of the students, but that protocol will be developed such as that we will minimize any face-to-face interaction of students. We don't want a plan that has kids passing each other in the aisle to throw paper towels out. And we want to avoid multiple student touches on any of the products, such as the spray containers and what have you. We are asking that all individuals sanitize or wash their hands individually, meaning our students particularly, on a frequent basis upon arrival, prior to eating, and after recess. We understand that washing hands with soap and water will be difficult with social distancing, so we are providing a supply of hand sanitizers for all of our classrooms and other areas that are occupied by our children. Continuing with the cleaning and sanitizing of our facilities, we are allowing water bottles. Students may bring water bottles from home. High-touch surfaces on buses will be cleaned at least twice daily. We will ventilate all classrooms and common areas when available and possible using windows. We want circulation patterns that push inside air towards push the inside air towards the open windows. And I don't fully understand this, but Mr. Taylor has shared with us that the HVA systems can be manipulated such that there is a higher degree of ventilation in the classroom. So we will do that to the extent possible with the weather conditions. I'll talk later about an isolation area for symptomatic students and staff. That needs to be cleaned regularly and after any individual is in there. There is a nightly cleaning routine that is required by our cleaning staff. And we will be providing plexiglass barriers in designated areas where we know there will be a requirement for face-to-face interaction. In looking at classroom learning space and occupancy, we are looking at no less than 3 feet of social distancing to the maximum extent feasible. We are limiting to as much as we possibly can any face-to-face occupancy seating arrangements. Dr. Fraser has shared that we are defining 3 feet as 4 feet from center of body to center of body. When we have tables that need to be used, we will make sure the students are seated a minimum of 3 feet apart, and again, not face to face. We also want to make sure that we limit activities in the classroom that do not support social distancing. We need to give special attention to music classes and programs, art, family consumer science, and other classes where there's significant hands-on activities. We have met with our curriculum coordinators to begin this process of how we can adjust those programs. So as an example, our art department will be providing individual art kits for students so they don't have to share those materials. There'll be protocols for students to maintain their own portfolio so we're not passing papers back and forth. So we'll be looking at those type of activities in all of those areas. We are looking to have assigned seating in classrooms and other congregate settings when feasible to facilitate contact tracing should that be necessary. As Dr. Fraser has stated, one of our challenges that we're still working on is the limited use of cafeterias and other congregate settings such as the auditorium, the gymnasium, the library. These large settings will only be used when we can maintain social distancing requirements and face coverings are used. We have looked at, we are meeting constantly on this matter. We are looking at, supplemental locations, eating in the classrooms. So we have a lot of different options that we're looking at. We're trying to fall upon what will be most appropriate for our kids. We will not have face-to-face seating in the cafeterias. We will have assigned seating in the cafeterias so that we can utilize that information for contact tracing when necessary. We are asking the students to wash their hands or sanitize their hands before eating. And all areas will follow the guidelines of no more than 25 in a space during a yellow stage, or more appropriately, as we are in green right now, 250 people. That 250 people limit has, again, a huge impact on our cafeterias, where we typically at the high schools have several hundred students eating lunch in this facility at the same time. So that's another limitation on that cafeteria usage. Hygiene practices, we are trying to maintain the focus on the appropriate hygiene practices, the best way to stop transmission of any type of virus or illness. So we want to, again, keep focusing on the washing and sanitizing of hands. We have signs that will be posted about hygiene practices within each classroom and other areas where there's common areas in the buildings. We are restricting no volunteers or visitors will be coming into the buildings beyond the main office. Any visitors that do come into the main office will have to comply with the same screening protocols that we will have in place for students and staff. And as we currently do, there will be a requirement of a visitor log in the event that we again need to do any contact tracing. Another area that's taking a lot of attention is our recess and physical education. We will continue recess and physical education activities as long as those activities limit physical contact and touching when feasible. PE and recess will not, we will conduct those without sharing of any equipment, and high touch areas of the playgrounds is recommended that we have those cleaned with our COVID disinfecting systems protocols on a weekly basis. We need to limit the sharing of materials to the extent possible. We will limit multiple touches to materials and equipment. We will clean materials and equipment between individual student use. As I indicated, we have purchased a large supply of cleaning solutions and wipes for the classrooms. Again, special attention to those classes that typically have a lot of hands-on activities. Students will be asked to bring in their own school supplies with each individual label with the student's name or initials. We will not be having community bins of supplies in the classrooms. At the elementary level, where we use manipulatives, those will be divided up and assigned to individual students. And at the secondary level, shared materials will be limited and cleaned in between use. Another big issue that we want to focus on is the staggering the use of communal spaces and hallway. We want to limit high traffic, high volume hallway use when feasible. To increase social distancing, we will have one direction hallways and stairways. We are going to use multiple points of entry and egress from the building for arrival and dismissal. We will not be utilizing lockers at the secondary level to minimize the traveling in the hallways. And we will limit the use of cubbies at the elementary level, particularly in those buildings where students are sharing the cubbies. Maintaining social distance requirements in the bathrooms, a tough one because we're encouraging people to wash their hands as often as they can, but there's limited space available in the bathroom. So we will have signs at the bathrooms indicating what the occupancy is of that bathroom at a given time. Adjusting the transportation schedules, we are following the recommendation that we limit students on a school bus or van to 2 students on a bus, with the requirement that all individuals wear face coverings. We will send out some communication, educational information, encouraging parents to promote social distancing at the bus stops. We will encourage students from the same family to sit together on the bus. We will educate students and provide signage on the buses so that students remain facing forward, not looking backwards or to the side. Open the windows to the extent that we can with the weather conditions. And again, we will have assigned seating on the buses in order to facilitate contact tracing when that is necessary. Our Champions program that runs in the buildings will be required to follow the same standards that we are using throughout the district during the school day. And we will also not be authorizing any field trips at this time. Another important aspect is monitoring our students and staff for symptoms. We will be educating all of our stakeholders, the parents, students, staff, on how to screen for signs and symptoms of COVID-19 at home before sending kids to school. We will work with our parents and our staff and reminding them of the importance of staying home if they are ill. And we will require any individual who discloses symptoms while in school to wear a face covering. Obviously, that would be in effect once we are, if that mask order is lifted. We will be reminding students at the beginning of the day of the signs and symptoms of COVID-19 and reminding them what to do if they feel any of those symptoms coming on. This is recommended by the Department of Health as very critical in terms of the screening protocol. So it's primarily in place. So it's another mechanism by which we can screen our people who are in the building. We will certainly do this in a way that is developmentally appropriate based on the age of the children. We'll use language that's appropriate for the age of the kids. And we will also include their periodic narrative, trying to help allay any stress and anxiety that, you may have a cough. That doesn't necessarily mean you have the virus. We're just checking on things. So we'll also include some of that language, particularly for some of the younger kids. We will ask the parents to use the checklist that we will be providing and that has been provided by the health department to screen the children for symptoms. Any student who presents with any type of symptoms in school will be evaluated by the nurse. And we are asking that staff and students, families must notify the school if an absence is COVID-19 related. I had mentioned previously, we need a mechanism for isolating individuals who may be symptomatic. So an individual who becomes sick during the course of the school day will be required to wear a mask if that mask list should be lifted. Anyone who is in contact with that individual will remind the student they are to report to the nurse's office. We will identify in each building an isolation area. We want an area that has adequate ventilation, easy exit from the building so that we don't have kids traveling through or staff traveling through the building if they are symptomatic, and one that will be configured to promote safety and privacy. We will be training staff on the symptoms and procedures for sending individuals to the school nurse, and we will be making parents and guardians aware of what those procedures are. We want to do the very best we can to make sure that the nurse's office is used only for essential nursing functions so that we limit any exposure. We will ask parents to make sure they have a plan in place for picking up their students should it be necessary. We will provide the appropriate PPE to staff and students who are in the isolation area or in any way connected to that. An individual who is isolated, they will remain in the isolation area until we can dismiss them from school. And we want to make sure, as I said, that that area is well ventilated, exits easily to the outside, and is easily disinfected. Our nurses will all have a written protocol for how they will evaluate students who present to them, so that we're consistently looking at that. And we will require any individual who is sent home with symptoms to secure a COVID-19 test or a medical clearance prior to returning. It's important to point out that our nurses will have received information and training and will be looking at the entirety of symptoms, not any symptoms in isolation when they make an assessment of a youngster. And they will also be doing that in conjunction with other information they have on the student's medical history, and we will be soliciting additional information from families prior to school starting along those lines. We will notify the Bucks County Department of Health of all positive COVID-19 test results, although usually they're the ones that are notifying us in that situation. This slide is basically saying that we will be working in close coordination with the Department of Health. Any individual who is isolated or quarantined because of a positive COVID-19 test results, we will definitely be in contact with the Department of Health in terms of how we proceed in that case. They will help us in determining how long the student should be removed from school and what type of clearances will be necessary for the return to school. And then as the Department of Health will be educating our nurses and the points of contact in the building on the process that the department will follow in issuing clearances to return from isolation or quarantine. We want to make sure that that flow of information and the communication is very clear, and you know, in the moment, we know exactly what we're doing. Any closure of classrooms, schools, or districts of the district will be done in conversations, discussions, decisions will be in consultation with the Bucks County Department of Health. We will work with the Department of Health, as we already do with similar cases of contagious and infectious diseases, to guide us in how we move forward in that situation. The Department of Health has been an excellent partner always to us. When we have a situation where we have a student with a communicable or infectious disease, we make a contact and we get direct, immediate information on how to proceed. And we're looking forward to be able to continue that. And we will follow the Department of Health's guidelines on isolation, quarantines, and more importantly, on contact tracing. We have a need to make sure we protect students and staff at higher risk for severe illness. Students who are considered to be at high risk based on some of the CDC information, we will identify those. We will be reaching out to parents to help us with that. I know that Mrs. Taylor in our HR department has already started working with our staff who are considered to be at high risk. When we have students who we do identify at high risk, we will develop a student-specific plan for them that facilitates their safety in coming to school. We will recommend that staff who are at high risk wear clear face shields when they're interacting with others. We will actually, certainly anyone that feels more comfortable with a clear face shield as a face covering, that will certainly be allowed. As everyone I'm sure is aware by now, effective July 2020, that all Pennsylvania students are required to wear a face covering at all times in school and while attending or participating in any school function, with limited exceptions for specific individuals as directed by the PA Department of Health and following the guidance of the Pennsylvania Department of Education. The following action steps are in our plan only in the event that that order is lifted at some point in time, that we have this to refer to as our guidelines should that happen. We are strongly encouraging the wearing of face coverings, especially for our older students. Any individual may elect to clear face shields in lieu of another type of face covering if they choose to. We are requiring that individuals possess a face covering at all times and to carry it with them at all times in an event that its use is required or needs to be enforced. In situations where minimal social distancing cannot be adequately accomplished, such as in the hallways where we would want students to have a mask on face-to-face interactions. So if the teacher needs to comfort a young student who's upset or hurt, or if a teacher needs to provide some individual assistance to a student, we want to be able to say, we'd like you to put your mask on so that we can work with you. Anytime where social distancing is difficult, we will be asking for masks or other face coverings. We need to address unique safety protocols for students with complex needs. We recognize that we have students who are not able to understand social distancing requirements or are unable to comply with those requirements for a variety of reasons. We also have students who have significant personal care needs where we're providing assistance with toileting and other daily living functions. Those individuals we will provide them with the necessary PPE so that they can work safely with those students. And we will be providing our staff who work with those students with guidelines and strategies that they can use to maximize their safety and the safety of others who will be working or coming in contact with those students. And lastly, the strategic deployment of staff. Students will be provided with the amount of support needed to benefit from all learning opportunities as needed based on the format of presentation. Our student services staff will be in communication with all families to ensure that they are aware of the resources that are available for social and emotional wellnesses. We will have a protocol in place to help us identify or to work with students who self-identify as needing additional social and emotional support. And our student services staff will outline the counseling and staff referral process so that staff, parents, and students can easily refer students for assistance during this very, very stressful time. And that concludes that part of our presentation. Robert, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I was talking and I was on mute. My apologies. Thanks, Dr. Lambert. Very thorough, very well done. What we're going to do now is transition to Ms. O'Grady. Susan O'Grady has been diligently over the past few days, many hours of combing through questions that have come in through our reopening email address. We do again have Dr. Damsker gratefully on the Zoom call with us, so that is outstanding. So he is going to be jumping in and out of answering questions, and cabinet members, myself, and other members of the steering team on the call will be doing the same. So Ms. O'Grady, if you are all set, we can probably get started with those.
Yes. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. So as a point of reference, these questions have been compiled into themes, and we also consolidated questions for efficiency's sake and identified individuals for whom their area of expertise speaks to the question that was pointed. So with no further ado, I will begin the first set of questions which fall under the theme of social distancing. So the question is, what percentage of rooms in the district can physically handle the 3-foot social distancing recommendation? And Mr. Andy Sanko is going to respond.
Thanks, Ms. O'Grady. So all of our classrooms can physically handle 3-foot social distancing as the recommendation. If we look at our full-size classroom, regular ed classroom, because as you know, we have classrooms of different sizes. We can honor the 3 foot of social distancing in all of our classrooms, but as it relates to our full-size classrooms, we can get near our typical class size in our full-size classrooms.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Sanko. Also in the same category as social distancing, if enrollment in a grade goes up, for example, first grade, how will you handle overcrowding and social distancing? Dr. Frazier.
Sure, thanks. This is something that not in this context, but we deal with this on a pretty regular routine basis. So and not only after the school year begins, but most parents know that we have an enrollment deadline of June 1st, and yet we still see new enrollments between June 2nd and the beginning of the school year, and we'll continue to see them throughout this summer as well. We already are. So what the one guarantee that I will make is that we will not in any circumstance go less than 3 feet of social distancing. So as I mentioned at the beginning, our plan right now is 4 feet. Overall, we can fit about 88% of our students. If we go down to 3 feet center to center, obviously we can fit more. Not anticipating needing to do that in the vast majority of cases. But if we do see an influx at a certain school, certain grade level, we will not, unequivocally will not go less than 3 feet. That may mean that we need to look at sister schools if we are at the max capacity at that school, and it may be that because we will have this, what we feel is high quality, high value, effective at home learning program, it may be that a new student would, if we're at that 3 foot maximum capacity, the new student may, if we don't have opportunity at a sister school, may go into that at-home learning environment.
Thank you. Next, how will the district ensure that one-way hallway traffic is maintained at all schools? Mr. Sanko.
Thank you. So we have been meeting with building administrators, as Dr. Lambert said, and we're prepared to have all hallway traffic flow in one direction, particularly at our secondary schools 7 through 12. It will require us to extend the transition time between classes And we will use the signage that is going to be purchased to indicate the one-way traffic as well as the 6 feet of social distancing that we need among our students.
Thank you. The next area of interest falls under the category of masks. What is the scientific value of masks? And this is for Dr. Damsker.
Hi, sure. So masking is traditionally used for 2 different reasons. One is to protect the wearer from the sick patient. So in the hospital, when you have someone on certain conditions, you would put a mask on that healthcare provider to prevent them from getting sick from that patient. And then, of course, there's also a secondary utility for masks, is if you yourself are sick and you cough or sneeze, it prevents the droplets from coming out. And that's traditionally why a surgeon, for instance, wears a mask during surgery. So if he coughs or sneezes, during a surgery, that would prevent the germs from, spreading to the patient who is clearly at risk at that point. So, the masking order has been ordered by the governor, and that will obviously allow, children that are sick to, they're speaking, coughing, sneezing into a mask that prevents the spread of germs. And it actually does prevent help spread the germs to the wearer, where any large droplets will be stuck on the outside of that mask. And that will be a good thing both ways. But what's very important to know with masking, though, they have to be handled correctly. And that's a concern, especially with smaller children, that if they have germs, viruses on their hands, and they fiddle with their masks a lot and touch it, they can contaminate the mask with what was on their hands. And there's lots of issues with that. So we need to be very careful, especially in smaller children, when we place masks on them in order to prevent mishandling, misuse, and contamination of those masks.
Thank you. Will there be breaks for students to go outside without masks? Mr. Sanko.
Yes, it's our desire to have students at every grade level to be able to go outside at some point without masks, but understanding that, again, the minimum of 6 feet of social distancing has to be applied at any time a mask is not worn.
Thank you. Are there exemptions to the mask order? Are parents required to provide medical documentation to be exempt from mask wearing? Dr. Lambert.
Actually, Dr. Levine's order does include 5 exemptions for individuals who would not be required to wear a mask. Several of them are not really relevant to the school setting. The one that is most particularly relevant is individuals who cannot wear a mask due to a medical condition, including those with respiratory issues that impede breathing, a mental health condition, or a disability. So that would certainly impact some of our folks. In terms of the documentation, we are not allowed, or we would not be requiring documentation as to what the reason is that a student would not be able to wear a mask. I will say that we would probably ask for a reason, although we wouldn't require it. From a nursing point of view, I think it's pretty helpful for the nurse to know if there is a medical condition that is affecting that student, so that we can make sure that we care for them as best we possibly can. So although we might ask, there is not a requirement for that documentation.
Thank you. If no masks are required for a particular activity, for example, recess, and a parent wants their child to wear a mask at all times, can that parent opt their child out of the particular experience? Dr. Frazier.
So right now, that question isn't terribly relevant because we do have the mask order from the state, but it may become relevant. And of course, if students are able to social distance, then masks may not be required at that point as well. To directly answer that question, if and when that time comes, the answer is yes. As I said at the beginning, safety is paramount, is first and foremost, always is, always will be. So if we have a parent that wants to opt their child out of a particular activity, out of a health concern, then we would just ask that parent to do what they would normally do and work with the teacher, work with the building administration, and we'll be happy to accommodate that to keep our students as safe as we possibly can.
Can classes be structured so that children wearing masks are separated from children who do not wear masks? Dr. Frazier.
In a perfect world, yes. In reality, probably not. The only chance that we would have to do that in all likelihood is at the elementary level. Numbers would have to break just perfectly in order for that to happen. There is so much mixing of students, of course, once we get into middle school and high school, that is a real really not practical, and probably not practical at elementary either. But if the numbers would break perfectly, then that would be the one and really the only one situation where that might be a possibility. We cannot go in from a planning standpoint with that as a part of the model.
Will children still be able to socialize with each other in classrooms while wearing masks? Dr. Lambert or Dr. Elliott?
I would say that in questions of those nature that we get from our staff, the answer is strictly yes, as long as it can be done within the guidelines that we've set forth. So if that socialization can occur with masks and its appropriate distances, yes. That said, like many things with our children, we will probably have to do some modeling instruction on what that looks like, because it's going to look very different than what they're used to. So we'll probably do some instructing in the beginning of the year of what that looks like for them. But we certainly want to encourage our kids to socialize.
Thank you. I think we covered the next question before, and we're moving now into the category of social emotional, but it probably bears repeating. So Dr. Lambert, what are the mental implications on children of daily announcements regarding COVID symptoms?
I'm not being exactly sure the intent of the question, but I do believe that, as I said earlier, that we don't want to be causing increased stress and anxiety for our kids by, especially our younger guys, thinking that, you know, I have the sniffles, I have the virus, something bad's going to happen to me. So we will be working with our staff to provide language in those messages that we give that are meant to help us in screening, but also to not heighten the sense of anxiety or stress in the youngsters.
Thank you. Our next set of questions revolve around the topic of scheduling. Have we considered an AM/PM split day schedule? Dr. Frazier.
I would say no to that. This falls into the line of the hybrid model that I spoke of earlier. If we do end up doing a hybrid model, implementing a hybrid model, it is not likely to be an AM/PM type schedule. That is a real strain on our transportation system. It's also a strain on parents, working parents in particular. So now every day is a problem for you in being able to get to work. And let me just say too, because I saw an email that had come in from a couple parents who are considered to be essential workers at their workplace. And so when I talk in the beginning about how we hope to not need to go to a hybrid model, that's really one of the reasons. Parents' ability to work is not lost on us. Lots of parents lost a whole bunch of work days this past spring. We know that, we understand that. And so safety, security is always first and foremost. And like I said, we are also very cognizant of those kinds of just family needs that people have, including the folks that perform essential jobs. So if we do go to a hybrid model, it's likely to be 2 days on, 2 days off, 1 week on, 1 week off, something like that, as opposed to an AM/PM model.
Thank you. In keeping with AM/PM considerations, will kindergarten still run as an AM/PM schedule this year? Mr. Senko.
Thank you. Yes, based on this template and this draft that's in front of you this evening, we will still run an AM and PM schedule for kindergarten, but you've heard several times from Dr. Frazier, if we have to move to a hybrid model or a different model, we will have to revisit that AM/PM and may consider full day for one group of students and rotate with a full day for another group of students.
Thank you. Will the district extend morning drop-off time to address the increased number of parents who will be driving students to school rather than taking the bus? Either Mr. Senko or Mr. Stone.
So, thank you. So, our start time will remain the same, but we've worked with buildings to plan for increased parent traffic by way of traffic flow in the buildings and increasing the entry points into the buildings. So the morning drop-off time will not change, but we will work to expedite the drop-off of kids while maintaining that social distance each morning.
Thank you. Our next topic has to do with transportation. How will we handle bus capacity with social distancing recommendations of 2 children per seat in place? Mr. Stone.
Thank you. Dr. Fraser mentioned that the capacity gap issue that we have for transportation is primarily at the elementary level. So we have a couple of approaches that we're attempting to take. We will be in very short order surveying our families to determine whether they will be utilizing the transportation. It will be an opt-in, opt-out survey. We'll be designing our routes based on that feedback that we get. And then we obviously may need to adjust ride times or plan to use what's known as a double back run in order to accommodate specific schools where we cannot get all the children on the bus in one route. So we will use that survey and approach it in that fashion.
Thank you. Our next question has to do with recess, and we had numerous parents asking the same question, which is once a week sanitizing of playground equipment sufficient? Dr. Damsker?
Yeah, obviously doing the playground as frequently as possible is important, although it's very difficult for the custodial staff to get to those every day. The most important thing with regarding the playground equipment is actually the kids sanitizing their hands prior to using the equipment, and then once again when they're off the equipment. If every child sanitizes their hands before they get on, they're not bringing the germs on, and if there are germs on there, when they sanitize, when they get off, they're going to prevent that spread before they touch their hands or face. So most importantly, the sanitizing of hands prevents the spread of disease. And playground equipment is not easy completely to clean, but doing it on a frequent basis, whether it's once a week, that it needs to be done, but the exact number of days isn't as important as the sanitizing by the children.
Thank you. The next area of consideration was building conditions. And like the question before, there were numerous parents who wrote in with the following question: how will children and staff wear masks in buildings without air conditioning? Either Mr. Taylor or Dr. Fraser.
Yeah, look, this is a tough one. I don't think there's any sugar coating it. It is very warm at the beginning of our school years and at the very end of the school years. Hopefully, this will be behind us by the end of the school year, but we will have a couple rough weeks here to start. I know that our teachers will be creative, as Mr. Sanko talked about, taking breaks, spacing students out so that the children can get the mask off. And again, knowing that this isn't going to be a whole school year issue that we have to deal with, but probably a couple weeks, 3 weeks maybe. I'm confident that we can get through it, and we'll need to be flexible in those schools. We still have 3 elementary schools that lack air conditioning: Hillcrest, Richboro, and Sewell Finestone, and our teachers and our administrators at those buildings will accommodate accordingly. But there's no sugarcoating it. It's always a rough first couple weeks at those schools, and this one might be a little bit even more.
Thank you. How will proper ventilation be ensured in classrooms where windows don't fully open? Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I know this question comes up a lot, specifically for Council Rock High School North, but there are many other schools in the district that have rooms without windows. And there's a misconception that a room without a window doesn't have ventilation, but we do in fact have heat recovery units on the roof at North that mixes with outside air. And we do have air exchanges taking place in every room, whether there's a window or not. So we are seeing positive air exchange, introducing new, fresh outside air. And in addition, we have building management systems that will allow us to adjust the amount of outside air that does come into a room. So if there's a need to increase that when the weather conditions permit, we will certainly do so where we can.
Thank you. Is the district considering purchasing UVC light sanitation devices for the schools? Mr. Taylor or Mr. Stone?
Yep, thank you, Susan. So we are not, ABM is our custodial vendor. They utilize a Virex 256, which is 100% effective in killing COVID-19. So that is the product that will be used in lieu of the UV lighting for disinfecting.
Thank you. The next area of interest was symptoms and exposure. What are the guidelines if one child in a family is sent home sick? Will the siblings have to go home if they show no symptoms? Dr. Damsker or Ms. Adamus?
Obviously, at this point, if this child is asymptomatic, we would not be recommending that they be sent home. This is one advantage of the governor's order requiring universal masking, is that, you know, everybody's sort of on a modified quarantine as it is, right? Everybody shouldn't be coming to school if they're sick anyway. And this would allow that other child, the sibling, to stay in school, to continue learning, and with the mask on, of course. And when that child, you know, goes home, depending on what the situation is, obviously, with their sibling, you know, we would advise until things are settled that the two siblings stay away from each other as much as possible in the home. We can get into that more, you know, when it comes to isolation quarantine. But long story short is, you know, given that everyone is now masked, we don't see a reason if the second sibling is asymptomatic that they would need to go home.
Thank you. The next topic is contact tracing. Does the district have a plan for contact tracing? Again, Dr. Damsker.
Yeah, and we have staff doing this every day. We contact every single case. We've done that since the very beginning. We have 5,600 plus cases in the county. We contact every case. Occasionally, the case finds out about it before we do, but a lot of times we have the results before the case even finds out. We would contact the school, the superintendent, the principal, obviously the child and the parents, but figure out, you know, where the child got sick. Was he sick in school? You know, what was the child doing in school? Find out the kids who sat around them, and do an entire investigation of each case. And that would allow us to figure out the best course of action going forward. It will be done on a case-by-case basis, but we absolutely will be doing the contact tracing because we do it every day, all day long.
Thank you. Also with contact tracing, how will we track the health of such individuals as crossing guards and bus drivers? Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Susan. So all employees, whether they're Council Rock employees or bus drivers or employees of First Student or crossing guards, are also outside employees, will have a procedure and a process to follow in the event of a suspected COVID or a confirmed case of COVID.
Thank you. For cleanliness and hygiene, we had many questions, one of which is, does the district have, how will classrooms supply such supplies such as wipes, hand sanitizers, and masks for teachers and staff be funded and supplied? Mr. Stone.
Thank you. So at the time that the board had to approve its budget, these guidelines from PDE and from the Department of Health were not available. So these purchases are not included in the budget, but we do have a few funding sources that we can take advantage of to be able to supply what is necessary. The first of that is a state grant and a federal grant that the district has already been awarded and is in the process of completing its application. The second is some committed fund balance, which is akin to your savings account or the district's reserves. There are some funds available in that. And then the third, if it reaches that point, would be to utilize some specifically identified budgetary accounts within the operating budget, which would mean we could not proceed with other purchases that we had intended to in order to be able to accommodate these guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you. Will air disinfectants such as Lysol be used to kill airborne bacteria? Dr. Damsker?
Yeah, what I would recommend on a fairly regular basis, if the custodial staff has the disinfectant sprayers that can sort of be used in an entire room, that would be used obviously in the evening, when the students weren't there, and once it's dry, it's safe. But those are the kind of equipment that could be used on a fairly regular basis to sort of disinfect the entire room in each classroom.
Mr. Taylor, anything to add to Dr. Damsker's response?
I can confirm that ABM does have the touchless air misters, and we also have several owned by the district. So we do have those in hand, and that will be part of ABM's practice here.
Okay, thank you. Also with cleanliness and hygiene, can we ensure that a lack of bathroom hygiene supplies for hand washing, such as bathroom soap or paper towels, will not be an issue? Again, Mr. Taylor.
Yes, thank you. So if you're not aware, we did recently replace our custodial team who was here for quite some time with a new vendor, ABM, who is here now, who I can tell you is geared up with the supplies that they need, including the Virex 256 in terms of soap, paper towels, and other chemicals and supplies. I can't ensure that a dispenser won't go empty, but I can ensure that they will fill those in a timely fashion. So I assure you that they will be on top of keeping paper towels and soap filled in the toilet rooms throughout all the schools. That will be a primary focus for them.
Our next question has to do with outbreaks. The person who wrote the question wants to know if there have been any outbreaks linked to daycare centers in our local area. Dr. Damsker?
Yeah, I would say it's a combination of luck and hard work by the daycares. We've had one case in a daycare, and that child did not spread it to any other children in the daycare. So again, it's a combination of good faith, of good luck, but it's also because the daycares are working really, really hard in a tough situation to prevent the spread of children that are not always masked and not always performing the highest levels of standard because of their age, obviously. So we want to give a lot of credit to the daycares in Bucks County for continuing to work hard on keeping the spread out of those daycares.
Thank you. Under messaging and communications, how will parents or anyone who's in a school be notified if there is a confirmed COVID diagnosis in a school? Either Dr. Damsker or Dr. Frazier for a follow-up to Dr. Damsker.
Okay. So what we always try to do, obviously, in public health is to send out the least amount of information that we can to protect the identity and the HIPAA information of a student or staff member that's positive. It's not always possible. There's times where you have to announce things in order to protect the safety of the students and staff. But what we will try to do is, obviously in conjunction with the school district, any information that's sent out would be, people that are affected directly would be notified, and say maybe the classroom parents of those students would be notified, hey, there was a case in your classroom, and then the next steps for that. But we would try not to announce it any more than we have to, again, to protect the medical information and the privacy of those that are affected with the disease.
Thank you. For sports, when will the community know if sports are occurring? Dr. Frazier.
I'll say that the community will know once we know. That's it's one of the big questions that's hanging out there. Again, as I said earlier, part of the guidance that is coming from PDE is rumored to include athletics guidance. I know that PDE has been working with PIAA. At the same time, many folks I'm sure have seen that the Ivy League has just canceled their fall season. There's lots of efforts being made at the professional level to have bubbles and all that sort of thing to keep players and coaches sequestered. This is one of those that we just don't know. As we sit here right now, we are permitting summer conditioning to go on. The board approved an athletics and marching band plan a couple weeks ago. So that is happening as we speak. But beyond that, we really start PIAA. We go into that territory on August 10th for football and August 17th for all other sports. So we're anxious to have some more information on that, just like you are.
Thank you. And our next and final topic theme has to do with the evolution of our health and safety plan. When can the community expect to see the next version of the plan with revisions and updates? Dr. Frazier.
Yeah, so again, we're expected to be back here again 1 week from this evening, talking not only about this plan with updates, but also the instructional component to go with it. And so I can't give a definite answer, but certainly it will be by then, hopefully before then. What we would endeavor to do is to send it out to the community a day or two before the meeting so that folks have a chance to read it, digest, process it, instead of just being presented with it at the meeting. So I'm confident that we're going to be able to follow a similar process here. Some of that is dependent upon what this PDE guidance is. And obviously we need to hear some feedback from our board members this evening that will could influence that as well.
Thank you. And our final question, will a parent or parents be added to the Health and Safety Plan Committee? Dr. Frazier.
Yeah, so I've seen this question a couple of times. Obviously, some of our staff members who are either on the steering team or on one of our committees are also parents in the district. But really the main way that we're looking for contributions, input, feedback from parents in particular is through the surveys that we're doing, and then through this robust process of taking questions through the reopening email address like we're doing right now. Some of those questions get answered real time, just like now. Some of them will get answered via email. Dr. Damsker was kind enough to create an FAQ document for us that's on our reopening hub. We will be adding our own FAQ as time goes on. So I'm comfortable and confident with the plan that we have in place. A lot of opportunities for input, and again, frankly, we need that input. And again, you know, the work is being done in short order. So we're calling meetings sometimes on very short notice. And fortunately, we've been able to have people attend. But for logistical reasons and for reasons, you know, just other means, other mechanisms of having parental input, we're going to keep with the current configuration of our steering team and of our committee. But certainly ask folks to keep asking questions, keep sharing ideas, and keep please responding to that next survey when it goes live next Friday morning.
Thank you. That's the end of our question session.
All right, terrific. Thanks so much, Ms. O'Grady. And with that, Mr. Block, Board President, we'll turn it over to you for board questions and discussion.
Sure, and I'd ask my peers, please raise your hand, and I'll keep an eye on that and call on you as you have comments or questions. And maybe as they're doing that, Dr. Damsker, maybe it would be helpful, certainly for the audience, but also for us, to understand your perspective on school reopening and what informs your decision and your guidance. You know, personally speaking, from my view, you're closest to the ground. You know, you're have access to all of the professional opinions. We get a lot of input from folks. Have you seen this? Have you seen this? Do you know this? We're not the experts, and that's why, you know, I'm thrilled that you're here. It would be great to hear from you, maybe as a tee off to this discussion, your holistic approach, where you get your information, how you take your positions, how you share that direction with school districts, and how should we navigate some of the differing messages that we might get from a national or state, you know, organization, or try and avoid the political nature that unfortunately creeps into this.
Sure. So I would say that, you know, this is obviously it's a new virus, and that's why you're seeing all these different opinions and guidelines from multiple locations. You know, we go from what we see here in Bucks County. I said earlier today, earlier on this call, that we have, you know, 5,651 cases, and we have called every single one. We know what's going on in Bucks County. We have a really good sense of the community spread here, which is now down to the lowest that it's been for a really long time. We're down to the lowest number of hospitalizations that we've had since March. That's more than 3 months ago. So clearly, we're in a good spot right now. We have, you know, half of our cases we've gotten recently are from people that have traveled out of state and gotten infected there. And that seems to be continuing, but we're asking people to be real careful when they travel. You know, if you're going to go to Florida, if you have to go to one of the states that have higher levels of prevalence, we want people to, be really careful when they go. Stay away from the bars, stay away, continue to wear your masking, all those kinds of things. And we've done a great job. And I want to thank everybody on this Zoom that they've all been part of it, right? It was a county effort. We're still doing contact tracing, all the things we have to do to keep us safe here in Bucks County. So all the guidelines were written under the auspices of having a low community prevalence, okay? And so that's one really important thing. And all the guidelines that have been put into place sort of work together. It's not just one thing. It's all the guidelines in a symbiotic way, of tandem way of working together. Some of the issues that have come up, and these were all also written with a pragmatic sense. People have said, talking about 3 feet versus 6 feet. I'm very clear that 6 feet, is the CDC guidance. But as we've spoken about today, it's very impractical for any school district to have a 6 foot space between desks and able to be functional as a school. We know that droplet spread, which is the vast majority of the way this is spread, for many decades has been the sort of the standard, right? 1 meter, 3 feet has been the standard for droplet spread. And you've heard, increasing, there's been studies, WHO came out today with talking about how potential airborne is one mechanism for it to spread. I can tell you that while airborne spread may be, in certain situations, it may have happened, it's still clearly not the main vector of how this is spread. Measles, tuberculosis, chickenpox, those have an attack rate in households of over 95%. And it's very, very important to know the difference between airborne spread and droplet spread. And these guidelines were put into place that within 1 meter of someone talking, coughing, sneezing, the vast majority of these large droplets that come out of your mouth, they do go to the ground by gravity. And yes, is going a little bit further away a little better? Absolutely. 6 feet, 9 feet, 12 feet, 15 feet. If you put 1 student per classroom, you'll obviously be very safe. But in this case, WHO and many other countries that have reopened their schools are still utilizing the 3 foot area. So we felt comfortable in a low prevalence setting, to sort of get that out there. And we are looking at what other countries are doing. We're looking at what people are doing all around the country because no one knows has the exact right thing. But I just want to make it clear though that these guidelines were written both for the safety of our students. I have 3 children in a neighboring school district. I'm following. I want my children to be safe too. They're going to be riding the bus as well. And I think it's really important that we also take a pragmatic stance on these guidelines as well. Getting back kids to school is extremely important from a public health perspective. There's been higher levels of suicide, depression, many other things that are clearly negatively impacting our children. As was mentioned earlier on this call, there's plenty of 2 working household parents that can't be with their kids all day long to make sure the work's getting done. Social isolation has been an issue. And this has been a phenomenon that's been seen throughout the country over the last several months. So there is an important aspect to public health of getting kids back into school as well. So there's a safety issue and there's also a pragmatism issue with these guidelines. And again, this is all being done in a low prevalence setting. These guidelines are not written in stone. There's things that can change. Obviously, something already changed with the governor's order, with the universal masking. And we're hoping that, for the people that were nervous, that makes people feel better. I know that Superintendent Frazier has talked about moving the desks 4 feet apart instead of 3 feet apart, and that's better, right? Every little bit's better. But again, this is being done as a sort of as an entire body of work. It's not just one particular thing that we're working on. That's where the frame of reference I wrote the guidelines from.
Thank you, Dr. Damsker. I will hand it over to my colleague, Ms. Marcel.
Thank you, Mr. Block, and thank you, Dr. Damsker, for joining us for this meeting today. I just had a comment. One is that I just wanted to thank Dr. Frazier and the committee for all of their hard work on such a short timeline. I know that things have been just moving so quickly since the spring, and I just wanted to thank the committee for all of the great work that they did. Council Rock is always striving to do the best for their students in the community, and I just wanted to thank you all for continuing to do that. My first question is for Dr. Dansker. I've heard from a lot of people about different types of face coverings. Some have talked about, I know in the order there are a lot of different types of face coverings that are allowed, but I was just wondering if you could speak to, like, does it matter at all? I've had a lot of parents asking, you know, what kind of mask they should try to, or covering that they should send their student in for. So I just wanted to ask you that. And then I had one question for the committee. Thank you.
Sure. So obviously, the governor's order requires the covering to cover your mouth and nose. It doesn't require specific material. Obviously, having children wearing face masks for many, many hours a day, especially in schools, like you mentioned earlier, with no air conditioning, can be very difficult. We are we're going to be working with the superintendents. This is very early. You know, getting face shields for students is one of the options that we're looking at doing. Face shields allow better airflow on a hot day. And what's another thing that's really, really important, and I want to emphasize this, you know, whether you're an educator or whether you're a student. You know, I was giving a lecture earlier today in a room full of masked people, and I had a really difficult time understanding what the people were asking me because they were all wearing masks. I had to move forward to actually talk to the people that I was trying to, you know, listen to in this meeting. And it really made me think, you know, and this is one of the things where if you're an educator and every kid in that classroom is wearing a face mask, you can't see if someone's missing a point that you're trying to make. You have trouble hearing what they're asking when they have to ask a question. So they end up pulling the mask down and potentially contaminating it. So I think face shields are going to play a real big part in making sure that our kids are safe, and do it in a way where you can see their face moving, you can hear the questions. And I'm going to be, you know, I know that they're not the coolest looking thing. When I wear one, people, you know, I want to make face shields cool again. You know, it's something we can do so the kids feel comfortable wearing them. And I think that's really, really important, because I think you may see, you know, maybe kids can decorate their own and make them neat, but I think that would be sort of, it would eliminate some of the issues that I know our teachers are going to have when the kids are all wearing face masks and they can't see that puzzled look on a kid's face when they're going over a math problem and the kid doesn't get it, when normally the teacher can see it. And it'll make the teacher's communication both ways. And the teacher's wearing one also. So, but from a perspective of what the material has to be, the governor does not say anything other than it must cover the nose and the mouth.
That's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And then I didn't know, Dr. Fraser, if you or someone would be able to speak to, I know Dr. Dansker had mentioned how younger students obviously have a harder time and they do more touching on their mask, and it you know, isn't necessarily a proper usage. And so I didn't know if you could speak to if there was a way that maybe the schools would be handling either younger students or those that just would have a harder time with either, you know, keeping them on or various things like that. So I just wondering if you could speak to that for those that might have younger students or ones that might need more assistance.
Sure, absolutely. And one of the pieces that is in that order is, you know, you need to be able to put that mask on yourself, and you need to be able to take that mask off by yourself, or whatever the face covering is. So yeah, I think there are things that we can do educationally at the beginning of the year, or kindergarten teachers, first, second grade teachers are accustomed to doing this sort of thing. And I would suggest that with this order now in place, that it probably behooves us to even put something educationally out now in the near future, because we do have several weeks before the start of the school year. So that way parents can work with their children, as I know many already are, but to help that process so that it's not a learning curve for all of our students at the beginning of the school year. And so students, for the most part, can come into the school year already feeling as comfortable as they can anyway, wearing that face covering. But certainly we will be equipped that those first days, first weeks of the school year, to work one-on-one individually with our students through that.
Thank you, Dr. Fraser. I appreciate it. Those are all my questions for now, Mr. Block.
Thank you, Ms. Marcel. Dr. Thorwart, you are next.
Thank you. Thanks everyone who helped out with this. Thank you, Dr. Dancer, for coming. I've got two questions and one fairly brief comment. I'm I'm an engineer, so I solve problems. That's what I do. In looking at this, and asking Dr. Frazier and our board council, the first thought I had was, well, let's just close the schools for a year and pause and wait for everything. It turns out we're not allowed to do that. We can't cancel education for a year. The next thing I thought about doing, moving everyone to cyber learning, because that keeps everyone out of the school. So it turns out we can't do that either. The hybrid plan, it turns out, might not meet school code at all, even though PDE's been talking about it. The 6-foot rule don't fit. If we go to a 6-foot rule, we just are not going to fit. So the bottom line is we really can't satisfy everyone at all. And I just want to thank the team because they came up with 2 options. We're going to open the schools. We're going to offer you cyber learning. Pick the one that's most comfortable for you and go forward. I like that. I like the fact that parents have a choice and parents can be parents and make that choice. Now on to my questions, and they're twofold. One might be for Doug and one might be for Bill. Doug or whoever wants to answer. We talked about multiple doors and using multiple doors to limit student egress in and out of, or limit the clustering of students. Over the past several years, we've gone to great lengths to minimize that for security concerns. I hear from parents and staff saying just pitch tents out in the yard. Well, that just violates everything we've done over the last 10 years to harden the schools against shooters and all that kind of thing. So how are we going to handle the security thing? And then I'll ask both questions. You guys can trade off however you want. And all of this stuff's going to cost a lot of money. We're not going to get it from the state or the federal government. So, Bill, I'm not going to put you on the spot if you don't know now, but at some point we need a price tag that goes with this for our community and for everyone else to see what this costs. Thanks. Doug, do you want to go first with security?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Mike. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of, are you speaking specifically of, of entrance? And I think the entrance in the morning is probably the bigger concern, more so than the departure. And we will absolutely make sure that our security team is observing those doors and being cautious. We will also make sure that those doors, like every other door, are locked down immediately after the students enter the school. And in many cases, we have doors that are locked through a building management system on a timer, so that those will automatically lock at a specific time. So I trust that our security team and I will prepare for whatever doors are going to be used in the respective buildings and make sure that we manage those entries closely.
Dr. Thorwart, with respect to a price tag, a plan is only as good as the assumptions that underlie it. And at this point, we're
I don't want to pin you down if you don't know, Bill, and that's fair.
I am doing my best to come up with an estimate based on what we know at this point. I expect to have it before our meeting next week.
That's perfectly fine.
Right, and I think the good news is, as we looked at the budget and start to redesignate our fund balances, we're going to put a considerable portion of our fund balance towards COVID-19 contingencies. So,
indeed,
we're expecting the unknown. Dr. Thorwart, done there?
I am done. Thank you.
Bialik. Mr. Bialik, you there? You're on mute?
I'm there, yes, thank you. Well, I want to say thank you to everybody too. This is certainly, as I've talked to some of my colleagues throughout the past few days, this is an impossible task, just impossible. We never know what's going to be coming up next. The rules change all the time. It's hard to play by the rules when you don't know what the rules are going to be. They change all the time. So I don't envy any of you. I think Dr. Frazier probably has the hardest job in the school district for sure, but I think sometimes in the world. And I appreciate everything he's doing and the team's doing and my board colleagues as well. And I have to say, parents, we've gotten more emails on this topic than anything we've ever done that I can remember in the past. And we had over 2,000 people on this call tonight. So I appreciate all the engagement. That said, I'd like just to have a discussion from Dr. Damsker. You know, I can't help but thinking, I'm just a lay person. I don't know anything about medical anything. This is a virus that I from what I'm reading, is always going to be with us. And it's very hard to get good information because it seems to be tainted one way or another, you know? So I'd like to just get your opinion. When does this become, you know, go from a pandemic to an epidemic to, I think the term is endemic, where it's just something that's with us all the time. And it's like the flu that we deal with every year. And I'm not comparing this to the flu. I know there's differences. I'm just saying it's like the colds and the flus that we have to live with every year in schools. And is there a point, and what is that point, where it just becomes something that we have to deal with, and maybe we're not separating as much, and believe me, I'm happy that people are washing their hands. I was the person that people used to look at sideways because I would wipe down the tray with the spray on the plane, and people thought I was crazy, but now I'm the smart one, right? But when does this become something that we just have to deal with every year?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is just because there's a fear of the new virus. You know, you said flu, and you said something that, you know, I've been, you know, looked at funny for when you talk about flu and coronavirus, comparing them. You know, in children, the flu actually is more deadly than coronavirus. We had over 200 deaths just this flu season in the United States from coronavirus, from flu, which is far in excess of what we've had deaths-wise for coronavirus. Now, of course, the coronavirus was a shorter period of time, and there's still a lot, you know, of information to be gathered. But coronavirus is less deadly in children than it is in adults. The kids have less symptoms, and the kids, so far, the evidence shows that the transmission from kids to other kids and adults is less. We've certainly seen that here in our Bucks County data. So yeah, it's scary, it's new. And I think we do, and that's part of the reason why our guidelines talk about treating it like measles and other diseases that we see in our schools. And that's not to say it's the same as those, but what my intent is to say, hey, look, this could be with us for an extended period of time. And we can't say every time there's a case in a school, shut the school down. We can't say every time there's a contact to a case, send all those kids home. Because once you start doing that, we will be back in a mode of basically not having school. It's very disruptive, and there's no evidence to indicate, especially now that everyone's going to be masked, there's a reason why we can't utilize that modified quarantine situation. So I think this is going to be with us for a while. I don't want anyone on this call to think that a vaccine is going to magically come out and save the day. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. Even if they come out with a safe vaccine over the next several months, it takes many, many months for them to actually provide enough vaccine to the entire country, 350 million people. So, this is probably going to be with us for at least a year, before we see any major, I'm sure we'll be involved in the health department with any kind of vaccine like we were back with H1N1. But something very important to remember, H1N1 was, again, more deadly in children. We didn't close one school in Bucks County. So it's important that, we're taking this very seriously. I don't want anyone to think that we're not taking it seriously, because we certainly are. But at the same time, we want to get people used to the idea that we may have cases. I expect to have a case in every school district in Bucks County, multiple cases most likely as this goes forward. And I want people to get used to that idea. And the more and more people get infected with this, right now we have about 1% of our population that have confirmed cases. We probably think, given, because we talked to everybody, we talked to family members that just didn't get tested but have the same symptoms, probably closer to 5% or so of people have had this. For every family where there's someone sick, sometimes the siblings or the friends, they have the same symptoms, they went to the same place, they just don't get tested because they're not that sick. And most people aren't that sick. And that's another really important thing to note. Watching CNN, watching Fox News, you would think that, this kills everybody. And it's a shame, because we had all of our major outbreaks here in our nursing homes. We've had over 500 deaths, and 90% of those were nursing home patients. So what that means is, if you can exclude those, now those are still people and they count very much. I had one of my own staff members lost their mother to coronavirus in a nursing home. It hits home very, very hard for us here. But if you can somehow say, if you take those cases and separate them, clearly in that population, this disease is very strong. It's very bad in nursing home populations. But in the rest of the population, it's not that bad. And the vast majority of people do very, very well. Of course, there's going to be people who may get sick from this. There's people that end up, in a hospital for a couple of days. But what we've seen is over the last several weeks is that the cases are trending younger. And we've seen the hospitalizations continue to go down. We haven't had a death in Bucks County since June 29th. So my point is that this disease definitely has a major problem with a specific population. The rest of the population, it is closer to a flu-like disease with relation to death. And so I think people need to sort of say, hey, this is going to be with us for a long time, sort of take a new look at this and say, and it doesn't mean we stop wearing masks, right? It doesn't mean we stop taking it seriously. We don't stop doing all the things that we're talking about doing tonight. But it's going to take a little bit of an adjustment on our part to say, hey, look, this may be with us maybe yearly going forward. And as you said, this is something that we have to make an adjustment to and say, there's probably going to be a case in my school, in my children's school at some point, or on my children's bus, or on a sports team that my kid's on, or anything. And a lot of these kids, they're not even going to get sick in school. We're seeing the transmission for children. We're seeing them getting sick from a parent at home or something like that. So, no matter what we do, whether it's a hybrid model or anything else, we're not saying the kids won't get sick at school, because a lot of them are getting sick outside of school anyway. So that's why it's really important. Again, we have to look at this from a pragmatic perspective and say, hey, this has been with us for a long time. And the vaccine may not be available for a year, 2 years. HIV has been with us since 1982, and we still have no vaccine for that. So we don't know what's going to happen with the vaccine. We hope one comes and it's strong and the immunity is able to last. But there's just so many questions related to that. So I hope that answer kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense, and it's very common sense, which is I appreciate. So I appreciate a common sense approach and coming from your area of expertise. There's so much impact here. There's financial impact. This has destroyed our budgeting process and potentially has hurt our district, and really and realistically has hurt our district and districts around the country for some time to come. It's destroyed our local and national economy. It's really had a significant impact, but most importantly, it's really affected the mental health of almost everybody, and certainly our children. Our children are living in fear on a regular basis because of something that you said is probably going to be with us for some time. People aren't as affected. If they're in nursing homes, of course they're affected, and that's a very important population. We all have, many of us have people that are in our lives that are in that population, but at some point we have to back off the fear, and I just don't know how to do that. And we do have to get back to a normal and closer to what normal was in January. So I'm so concerned on so many levels, but for the most part, I'm concerned about our kids and each other's mental health because this is, I'm afraid that everybody's going to be walking around with some kind of PTSD. And as soon as then when the next thing comes about, then what's our reaction going to be? Because there's going to be another thing. So that's the end of my rant and question. Thank you very much.
Sure, and just to add one more thing, I think as this disease gets more common and you start to get to know people that have it, of course, this doesn't minimize the fact that there's going to be some people that are getting very sick. There may be someone who dies from this disease. But what we see is when we talk, and I've talked to a lot of coronavirus patients, and a lot of times I get the answer is, oh, that wasn't so bad. We've had people that have nothing but a loss of sense of taste and smell. They have nothing but a headache for a few days, or they thought it was allergies, and they took their allergy medicine and it didn't get any better. So they said, okay, this is weird. So that spectrum of disease is so wide, from very minimal symptoms, obviously, all the way to someone being on a ventilator. That's why this disease is kind of scary and weird all at the same time. But again, once people get to know and say, okay, my brother had this, my mom had it, my sister had it, and they say it wasn't that bad, I think you'll just start to see an overall attitude shift. But right now, about 1% of our population has had confirmed case. And so many people don't even know someone who's had it. Or if they do know someone, it could be someone in a nursing home who died, and it seems very scary, and it is scary. But I think it'll improve over time when more people have interactions with people that have had the disease and realize, that in most people, it's actually pretty benign.
So, Mark, is that everything?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks. Dr. Damsker, just while we're answering Mr. Bialik's question, and you might have said some of this, but specifically, I'm thinking now, you talked about the disease holistically and really the impact to children. What do we tell our staff? What do we tell the parents at home who are might not be concerned about the impact to children, but the children's ability to pick something up and spread it asymptomatically, thus potentially create implications for staff and or in the home?
Sure, and I think that it's really important that we do know that. And whether someone's asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, it's kind of a semantics, because a lot of people, they say they didn't have any symptoms, but when we actually interview them, they did. They go back and think, okay, I did have a runny nose for several days, I did have this, but either way, they didn't realize they were sick. So, what that means is we have to continue the hygiene. The teachers, if they feel comfortable, obviously will be wearing masks all day in school. There's some things that we're doing, that we went over. We spent a lot of time going over the plan for Council Rock and things that we're going to do to help people. Are we going to prevent all infections? And the answer is no. We will not prevent all infections. No plan will do that, regardless of what, as I said earlier, whether it's a hybrid model or you have 2 kids per class, you still may have an infection. So what we can do is continue to teach our kids the value of hygiene. And to be frank, it's been ignored for many, many years. We talk about the flu every year. People ignore us. We say, wash your hands, do this, do that, and people don't take it seriously. And this is the first time, and I've been doing public health for 20 years, this is the first time where I can actually see people taking the normal messages seriously about sanitizing. We had never had people wear masks before. But people are really taking it seriously now. And in some ways, in Pennsylvania, we were lucky that we had a spike early. And you see what happens in the other states, Florida, Arizona, they didn't really have a spike. And I don't think that some of their population took it as seriously as they should have. So the point is that, we can't prevent all disease. You may have a staff, a bus driver, a teacher that's worried. And of course, especially if you have underlying disease or it's a little scary. But what we've seen is there's a lot of risk, unfortunately. You can pick it up at Target or Giant or Acme, and we have people that get it there. You can go to visit your friends, and then someone at the party that you go to has coronavirus. So we just need people to be more careful. We need our kids to be more vigilant when they're at home. Hey, when you're home, still wash your hands, right? If you're not feeling well, don't cough on your hands and give your mom a hug, right? Or when you go visit grandma. I mean, we want everyone to be careful, even when you're with your own family. Just because you're with your own family doesn't mean you should take care to follow proper hygiene. So I think if all the kids sort of over time they buy into it, they're wearing masks, they're doing all the things they're supposed to do, that is going to lower the risk of our staff and our bus drivers, everybody else. And then again, when they come home, if they continue to practice those same types of things, we're going to lower the risk of transmitting it at home. But there is no magical plan. No plan, whether you follow CDC guidelines or WHO guidelines or any guidelines. You cannot say there's not going to be a case of coronavirus. And it's just no one can prevent all cases, but we can be smart, we can be pragmatic, and do our best to reduce the risk.
Thanks, Dr. Damsker. And if I could ask you, maybe your audio changed. We still heard it, but it got a little lighter. So maybe if you can come closer to the phone, or if something changes. No worries. And I'll call on Mr. Tate here.
Thank you, Mr. Block. Thank you, Dr. Damsker, for participating tonight. And Dr. Fraser kept us apprised from the very beginning of this pandemic about your involvement in working with the schools and the IU, which I think is terrific. We appreciate it. Thank you to everybody on the team who's been working on this plan. Earlier today, I heard from somebody in another Bucks County school district that our plan is being looked at as a model in some respects, particularly in the way it's presented, which is a neat thing to hear, and also speaks to the fact that the school districts across Bucks County are sharing best practices, so we all know what some of the best approaches might be. The other thing I want to mention is, as Dr. Fraser said at the outset, next week during the joint committee meeting, during the education committee, we'll be hearing a lot about the distance learning plan and also the way instruction is going to change in the classroom. And finally, Dr. Fraser, would you address the questions we've been getting about A, is the recording of this meeting going to be online? And B, are the slides going to be online? I think the answer is probably yes, but I'll let you answer that. Thank you.
Yes. Yes and yes. Mr. Frederickson, the recording, I know that we are unable to live stream. The recording should be on by about what time tomorrow would you estimate?
Probably by noon, if not just a little bit later. It depends on how long the meeting lasts. That dictates how long it takes to convert to get it uploaded.
Understood. And any slides that aren't already up there, some of them are, some of them aren't. The ones that aren't, Mr. Tate, will be up prior to noon.
Thank you, Dr. Fraser. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Mr. Tate. Ms. Brooks. You're on mute still?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry about that. What is a Zoom meeting without asking, can you hear me, or you're on mute? Anyway, I want to just add my thanks to Dr. Fraser, the whole team, everyone involved. I really want to thank the community because while it is a little difficult to keep up with the volume of the emails, this once again demonstrates how important the emails are to the things that we all think about as we try to put forth a plan that's going to work for everyone. I mean, my personal opinion may very much vary from the plan that gets approved. So I really need the feedback from the community to understand, how to evaluate all the things that people are saying so that we can try to meet the needs as best we can for the greatest number of people. I have a few, first of all, thank you to my board members, my board colleagues, many of whom asked a bunch of questions that I had on my list, but I have a few more. One thing that Dr. Damsker has said and has been referenced is, everybody will be masked and the masks will help. But we've gotten a lot of emails about this, and I try to avoid going onto social media because it's very, stressful in some ways to read some of the things that are being said, especially when it takes a nasty tone. So my question is really a simple one. So much of this is about mitigating risk and keeping the community prevalence low, and mask wearing is a critical part of this. How do we enforce this when we hear the sentiments of so many in the community saying that they don't want their children to wear masks?
Yeah, and you make a good point. I mean, there's a certain percentage of people that really want their kids to wear masks. There's a certain percentage that refuse to have their kids to wear masks. And then there's the vast majority of people that will do what they feel is the right thing, whatever the school district suggests. And, my initial guidance was that masks were optional. And I said earlier today, I explained why, there's potential for real contamination, and, not handling a mask can actually be more dangerous if you don't handle it properly than wearing one. And smaller children, I still have some concerns about that. I do believe that with proper training, older students should be able to wear them, and hopefully face shields will be also, as I said earlier, will be utilized. But masks, they do work certainly for adults. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that masks work for adults. I think the best example that I can give, there was two hairdressers at a Great Clips in Missouri. And they were cutting hair. They were both symptomatic, and they cut hair of 100+ people between the two of them. They both wore masks the entire time, and not one person got sick. Not one person. And they were right. Cutting hair, you can't do that. You're not social distancing when you're cutting someone's hair. And that was a very recent thing that happened over the last month or whatever. And I think that was a pretty strong indication that when someone who's actually symptomatic, these weren't asymptomatic, these were actually probably shouldn't have been working, but they were, and they didn't spread it to anybody. So I think, masks are certainly proven in adults if they're worn properly to help prevent the spread of coronavirus. There is also, in children, there's not really a lot of evidence saying that it does help. And again, and I won't go into all the reasons again about the mishandling, but, it would make sense that if they do wear them correctly, that it would help. And yeah, I understand. There's parents out there that don't want their kids wearing masks. This is a free country. They kind of feel like it's a why should you make me wear a mask? And I understand all the logic, behind both sides of this. But then you have the parents who say, if your kids don't wear masks, my kids who may have, underlying conditions, those people may be at higher risk. So obviously they see both sides of this, but, assuming that the evidence in adults carries down to kids, that even if it doesn't prevent all spread of disease, which it won't prevent all the spread of disease, but if it does help and it keeps outbreaks from happening, what I would suggest to the people that don't want their kids to wear masks is that masking in school, now that it's in order, again, will allow us to continue in school. So it helps with our modified quarantine process, where if there is a case in a classroom, we can keep going. In that classroom, that child who's sick will go home, but that teacher can continue teaching in that classroom. And by us wearing that mask and moving into this modified quarantine process, that allows the classroom to continue. So you're actually, you may benefit from that and having your children continue to go to school and learn and not have their learning disrupted. So I understand there's not a ton of evidence for children to wear masks, and even less so in the younger children. But the governor's order does say that this is what we have to do. And there is some evidence, again, a lot of evidence that in adults, it does prevent illness from being spread from someone who's wearing it. And we do know that, again, for droplet spread, wearing a mask, if someone coughs and you're there, and the droplets go onto the front of your mask is contaminated. But if you're handling it properly, that actually can help prevent the spread of disease to you as well. So I hear you. There's people that feel very strongly on both sides of this. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. But right now, the governor has his opinion, and that's what counts. And there is some medical, reasoning for that for sure. And that's what we're going to go with.
So maybe this is a question then for Dr. Fraser or someone in the administration. I mean, at this point, it is required. The governor is saying it is required for masks to be in the school. What will we do if students don't wear them? Will they be allowed to stay in school? Do we know that answer, how we're going to address this?
So, Ms. Brooks, as I said at the beginning, I mean, there's a lot, obviously, to this and a lot that we're working through. Part of it is a week ago at this time that order wasn't known to be applicable to schools. So this is new. We're still understanding it. I had my first conversation with Mr. Cox, our solicitor, just today about it. So there's a lot to work through. I'll say this. One of my I'll couch it as a concern is the topic of these exceptions came up earlier, and I have a copy of the order here in front of me where it lists the 5 different exceptions that Dr. Lambert went through, and then to quote this, it says that individuals are not required to show documentation that an exception applies. So I'm going to go back to the survey data that we showed earlier, where the vast majority of our parents and the vast majority of our staff do believe that our students at minimum should be possessing a mask at all times and also wearing them on the school bus. And that is going to be the expectation with or without the order from the governor. That this particular clause in the order, while I understand it, it also causes me some consternation because it makes it more difficult to answer your question. My personal stance on this is order or no order. I am going to be strongly encouraging our staff to wear a mask with or without an order. No, not a mask, a face covering, whatever the face covering is. And I will be strongly encouraging, and the language that's in our plan is written accordingly, certainly our older students to be doing the same. I think that our survey data backs that up. I think, again, going back to the nature of our staff members, all staff members, but certain staff members in particular that do fall into one of the categories that are concerning, we owe it to them as well. And so I don't have a clear and definitive answer Ms. Brooks, as to exactly what that accountability is going to look like, because again, we are at this point in time. But what I do know is that an order is an order, an expectation is an expectation, and short of people, leveraging the exceptions that are part of this order, certainly the expectation is that those masks will be worn. And I want to go back to, just while we're on this topic, to something that Dr. Lambert said. I just want to amplify it, and that is, and we've had this conversation as a steering team, that, hey, what if we're in the classroom, and we had these conversations before the order came out. What if I'm in the classroom, I'm a teacher, I have a student who needs help. That student's going to have a mask on their person. I asked the student to put on the mask, and the student doesn't want to put on the mask, yet I know I need to go and work one-on-one with that student. And my answer and my message to our teachers is going to be, for your own health and safety, I don't want you going within 3 feet unless the mask is on. And that's simple, because we have to protect our students. As I said at the beginning, we also have to protect our faculty and staff. I'm very, very concerned about that issue, and trying to make sure that our plan does strike that balance. Again, our community is telling us we don't want one extreme or the other. We want somewhere in the middle. And I do feel as though the guidelines that Dr. Damsker and the County Health Department have come up with are generally supported by our community. We will continue to ask those questions and seek that feedback. But overall, I'm comfortable with where we're at, but this assumes compliance. And if we don't have compliance, then we might as well not even have the plan. So we will continue working on that issue, and at some point we'll have a more clear and definitive answer on that.
Okay, I think it's really important that the district take a stand and a strong position on this to understand it, because a lot of people are answering these questions on the assumption that rules will be followed. So if I'm a parent who wants to send my child to school, but it is critically important that masks are done and the social distancing is done the way we say, and then there's some flexibility where in practice that doesn't happen. Had I known that, there would be no consequences to that and that it wouldn't be adhered to in that way, then I may have made a different decision for my child. So this is a big issue for me. I have just a few other questions. Can you explain, are there any plans for the use of plexiglass? How extensive will that be beyond like just the cafeteria or maybe the office? Is there any plans? I'm actually just really looking mostly for how to super protect our staff who are, more vulnerable. And so is there any talk about that kind of thing beyond the things that are obvious?
Yeah, there is, and I'll yield to Mr. Taylor and Mr. Stone in a minute for them to get into some more of the details. But beyond the obvious places like front office areas and receptionists and that sort of thing, again, we know that we have one-on-one close-knit interactions in the classroom where that help does need to be provided. So we are looking at different kinds of plexiglass barriers, some that will work in the classroom. Picture a T, inverted T, sitting there with a little pass-through underneath. So we are, and Mr. Stone will be able to detail this a little bit better, but we're working off of an IU bid to get some consortium pricing. And as you would know, I believe the IU board just approved that bid list within the past
last night.
Day or two. Last night, there you go. So we talked at length about this issue, plexiglass, other PPE this morning in cabinet. So the answer is yes. Mr. Taylor, do you first want to jump in to amplify some of that, followed by Mr. Stone?
Yeah, I think you covered a good bit of it. In addition to those movable shields that would sit on desktops, we also talked about and asked the IU, and I haven't seen the bid list, to look into some mobile units that have wheels that could be rolled around and used at different locations as well. So that would provide some flexibility in other areas, as you're suggesting, Denise.
Great, thank you. I mean, eager to hear more on how that develops. There was a lot of talk about, we're a low prevalent community, and we're doing all these things to reduce risk. So I'm wondering why we're not, and this is focusing on the exposure. I had asked this question to the administration earlier when we met about when we see the word exposure and how we deal with it. Throughout this plan, it was specific to someone who was exposed to someone who was tested positive. Yet we're seeing all over the country now that certain states are enforcing quarantine if you come from certain states where there's a high prevalence of the virus. And so I'm just sort of imagining this sort of situation where it's the end of the summer and before the school year starts, we're going to try and get to Disney World. We're going to go to Florida. We're going to go to South Carolina, Georgia, all of these places that now, and maybe it won't be the case later, but let's assume it is, has, tremendous risk of exposure. And yet we're not doing anything necessarily within our protocols to limit people who come into our space from those areas. Is that a concern that we should be thinking about for our schools? Because that worries me. I mean, and that's something that's enforced, with my office reopening. People will not be allowed into our offices if they visited certain places. So if we're doing it in my workplace, it makes me think, should we be doing this in our schools?
And I can answer that if anyone else doesn't want to, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to comment on that first, if you would, Dr. Damsker.
Sure, and we put our money where our mouth is. Here at the county, we also we are not forcibly quarantining people to come back for 2 weeks. What we're doing is we're asking people. I said this earlier in the call. We're asking people to be smart when they go to avoid being infected, and when they come back, we're requiring that they wear a mask at all times. And not take it off at any point even when they're eating lunch, they take it off, they go somewhere apart from everybody else and social distance when they take the mask off. And of course, and doing all the symptom screening. We've been doing that. We haven't seen we've been doing things all along with it. We've been using modified quarantine for first responders, police officers, medical providers since the very beginning. And now that we're all masked, moving to that model makes more sense. When everyone's masked, you are actually making modified quarantine an easier thing to use. I understand your concern for sure. We're hoping that if things continue on as they are in Florida, and I'm hoping they won't, because they're actually making changes right now in Florida, Arizona, about masking and closing bars and things like that. So hopefully by the time, a month and a half from now, you'll start to see, the numbers will be coming down. And I believe that they will. The spikes always, they always go up and they always come down. The question is how long it takes. But, we are doing our best. We're answering those questions every day. We're giving, every workplace like yours has the option to do that if that's easier for them. But we are focused on this masking order. It allows us to be, bring the kids back. If a teacher goes, you could have 3, 4, 5 teachers who go to Disney World the week before school starts, and they're all going to not come teach, right? I mean, so that, to me, that pragmatically doesn't make a lot of sense when you can bring them in on this modified quarantine, making sure that if they become symptomatic, of course, they go home or they don't come to work. But we feel very strongly, and we're doing that here at the county, that it works. We've been doing things like that the entire time. We have a low rate. We've done the best. I believe we've had the best response of any county in the state of Pennsylvania. Of course, I'm a little biased, but I think we've done lots of things like that that are forward-thinking and progressive, and it's worked really well here.
Thank you very much. I mean, I appreciate that. I mean, I'm coming from a place where I'll just put it out there. I am not as comfortable with this as some others are and how you describe it. So this is going to take some time for me to process. I have one more question and then just a comment. We talked a little bit about crossing guards and bus drivers. How does this plan impact our subs, both the building subs and the ones that we outsource? And what are our concerns? And is there anything that we can do to begin to think about the sub shortage that we have in any given year and how it may be impacted now?
Ms. Taylor, would you mind speaking to that and also to the spirit of Ms. Brooks' questions? Maybe also touch on some of the work that you've been doing with our faculty and staff members who are considered to be higher risk?
Yeah, so I do want to go back to what you were speaking about before you asked the question. I won't forget about your question. So we have in the survey that we conducted with staff were asked to contact me if they had reason to believe they were at higher risk or had questions or concerns. So I have been talking individually with each staff member that has reached out. And we definitely know that we have a cohort of staff members that will need for us to work with them to provide additional accommodations to make sure that they're able to return to work. Each staff member that I've talked to has been wonderful, has expressed a desire to get back to working with the students, but has concerns, legitimate concerns and worry. And we're worried about our staff too, of course. So I do want staff that are listening to know that we care a great deal about them, and that if they have concerns and have not been able to connect with me yet, to please email me and we will set up a time. So about the substitutes, I have been meeting with and talking to our account manager at ESS on a pretty regular basis, and we're trying to plan as best as we can for the upcoming school year. It will be challenging without a doubt. Substitutes have hesitation about returning like many of our staff members do. Some of our substitutes may be in high risk categories as well. We are definitely going to do our very best. I know ESS is actively recruiting. We're looking at some different strategies that would allow us to have substitutes based more building based than floating about the district. So we're working very hard, and I will have more information on that.
Thank you. I know I've talked a lot, so I'm just going to close with one final comment, just in general, and you could probably tell from my questions. This literally has kept me up at night, worrying about how we're going to safely bring everyone back to school. But understand that I do recognize that we have to come up with a plan that sometimes, you have to accept some risk because there's, weighing out, which risk is worse, isolating our kids, not addressing their emotional needs to socialize versus, trying to be as protective as we can to, avoid the spread. So I understand that you have to strike a balance. I'm just so worried that there are certain assumptions in this plan that, you read it on paper and it makes sense. And, Dr. Damsker talks and, okay, I understand where you're coming from, but there's other news and other things that we hear that balance sort of opposite things. And so I would want to just make sure that we're looking at the things that, understanding it may not be perfect. So that's what I'm talking about. Like, what are we going to do when people don't wear masks? But even with the social distancing, and the spacing of the chairs, personally, I would prefer 6 feet of social distancing. Why? Because kids move around, the desks move. And so in practice, if we set up for 6 feet of social distancing, it may in fact be 3 to 4 feet. The closer you put them together, the more likelihood that there's going to be an issue that they won't maintain that. But then on a practical standpoint, I also understand that you can't fit, we're constrained by our buildings and you can't fit everybody in if you set up classrooms with a strict 6-foot distancing rule. But I would like to understand the percentage of capacity that we could accommodate if it was 6 feet, to understand, because maybe after hearing some of this, you're going to get different survey results. Maybe some parents will be less hesitant to send their kids or some other issue. So I'd love to know that answer, but also just, how are we going to help make sure that the plans that we put in place, like the masks, like the distancing, like the following the arrows in the hallways, which, I go to Acme and people aren't doing that. So how do we do that? These are the kinds of things that I'd like to hear addressed next week. So thank you very much for allowing me this time.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. We'll move to Mr. Salomon. Mr. Salomon, you're on mute.
There we go. Sorry about that. I apologize. And thank you for the 864 people standing by as we go through this. And thank you to everybody that worked on this plan. It continues to be a work in progress. And as we're continuing to see through the evening with the amount of emails still coming in, there's a real interest in our community. And thank you to Dr. Damsker for being here this evening. Doc, I have a couple questions for you. Let me start with the clarification question. I think you said something along the lines earlier of not sending siblings home on a confirmed positive case of another sibling. Did I hear that correctly? And can you just reiterate what if I did wrong or right, can you just go back over that?
Yes, sure. So what that would mean is if a student was sick, remember the student can be sick for 100 different reasons. It doesn't have to be COVID, and that's one thing that we're working with the school nurses to figure out. But if one student gets sent home for whatever reason, if their sibling is in school and they're feeling great and they're not symptomatic, we are not recommending that child, the second child, be sent home. Everyone's wearing a mask. It becomes, again, as I said earlier, a modified quarantine where they would leave their mask on and stay safe. Now, again, that other child may end up having something completely different, which is going to be likely as we move forward. There's lots of reasons why kids aren't going to feel well. School nurses deal with this every single day of the year before COVID. There's kids who are chronic visitors to the school nurse's office. But yes, that is the case. And that's also going to be the case, our recommendation in other situations as well, in order to maintain the classroom from having to shut down.
Okay, thank you. Can you also speak to, and these are headlines all over, what a lot of people and a lot of papers and a lot of networks and whatever are calling the surge? Are the numbers surging? Are the tests any better than they were a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 months ago? What is your sense? Because it's a concern for the parents. The parents are saying, we're reading and hearing there's a surge going on around the country, and now you're going to send our kids back to school. So what do you say to those parents? Because that's a real concern in our community.
Well, the real concern that you have to think about, the reason why we did a stay-at-home order in the first place is we wanted to prevent a surge in our hospitals. That was the number one reason we wanted to flatten the curve. Matter of fact, that was the only reason to do that, is to not overwhelm our hospitals. Not only were our hospitals never overwhelmed, but they are now severely underwhelmed with COVID. We have less cases now than we've had since the end of March in our hospitals. Now, again, our cases are around, between 20 and 30. They're kind of going up and down a little bit, but they're still at a low baseline compared to where we were many months ago. The surge that you're talking about is going on in states that never had the initial surge that we had, and New York City had, and New Jersey had. We went through the surge already. We were better prepared to handle, going forward. Even our green zone is more restrictive than some of these other states had, with rising cases. They've made changes now, so hopefully, again, that will lower their cases. It will take several weeks, but we'll see better cases in those states soon. But I've said this all along. There's no guarantee we're going to have a surge here in Bucks County. We're going to keep contact tracing. Now that the governor has placed the masking order, that solves some other issues. And I believe that there's no reason we have to have a surge. No one can say with any rational medical reason we're going to have a surge. This is just people making predictions. No one knows what's going to happen with coronavirus. I feel confident, unfortunately, that it's not going to go away. But I do think that the numbers of cases we have now, if we continue to work hard and do what we're supposed to do, that we can keep it relatively level for the extended period of time until such a time as the vaccine arrives, or if we're lucky enough, we stuff it out with social distancing, which is going to be very difficult. But I don't believe we have to have a surge. No, I believe if we keep working hard and keep doing what we're doing now, I think things might be okay. And so the states that you're having those surges never had the spike that we had originally.
And what are your thoughts on the current testing and the quality of the tests that we're getting out there? I mean, what are you seeing from your perspective?
Yeah, the testing has gotten a little slower because of, the national testing has gone up with these other states. People can get a test. If they want to go to CVS, Rite Aid, there's a couple other facilities, they're urgent cares, they can get tested. Early on, it was very difficult. You couldn't get a test. And it was you had to have fever and cough and shortness of breath, and we missed a lot of cases at the beginning. because we were forced to follow the guidelines set by CDC that you can only get a test for certain things. Now that we know that there's many other symptoms, we were the first people to talk about loss of taste and smell almost in the whole country because we contacted every case early on and we saw that. So there's lots of different symptoms that you can have. And it's still not easy to get a test if you're totally asymptomatic, even today. CVS asks you when you go to the website, do you have any symptoms? So the testing, the PCR test that we have, the swab, that detects active disease. Unfortunately, it also detects old disease. So if you had coronavirus 6 weeks ago and you get a swab right now, that can still test positive, and you're picking up dead virus in your nasopharynx. And that's why the antibody test comes into play, because if your antibody test is positive, that shows that your infection was potentially old and you're no longer infectious. And there's lots of different scenarios that we get into every day here that the average public doesn't talk about. I've never heard anyone on CNN or the national news ever talk about the fact that these swabs can be a false positive. Not that it's not a positive test, but you can be picking up dead virus, the remnants of a virus from weeks ago from an infection that you had before. No one ever talks about that on national news. I've never heard anyone say that, but we talk about it all the time here in public health. So no test is perfect, not the antibody test, not the swab, but it's definitely easier to get a test now than it ever was, back when the surge was happening.
Right. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
One more question, if you don't mind. I don't want the mask to overshadow what we're trying to do here. We're trying to educate our kids. I have 2 kids in elementary school that are going to be reluctant to wear the mask like every other elementary school kid, but they're going to persevere because they have good parents. They're going to teach them that. My sense is that some level of a face mask, a face shield may work better for the kids in terms of keeping it clean during the day. I took my kids out to dinner the other night. The mask came off in 3 minutes. It was on the floor. I have a friend of mine whose kid got to the dinner table and sneezed into the mask. That's my fear. Is there a backup mask? And that's something the parents are going to have to figure out. I get that. What's your sense on the face shield or something that falls? Is that a guideline? Is that in the guideline enough? Or, I mean, what's your sense? I know some people are wearing gaiters. And as of yesterday, Disney World outlawed the gaiters. You can't wear them in Disney World. So, what's your opinion on the best possible thing for our children to wear that's effective for the staff, that's effective for the children, effective for their parents, and everybody else who's going to come in contact, but not become the focal point of the day?
Yeah, and I think a face shield, which is clearly allowed by the governor's order, I talked about this earlier on the call, is a terrific sort of middle ground. It allows you to speak better, to see someone's face while they're talking. If it gets contaminated or dirty, you can take an alcohol wipe and wipe it down. And you can actually reuse a face shield ad infinitum until it gets cracked or broken. But you can wipe it down, you can spray it down and clean it off and sanitize it. You can't do that with masks. Once a mask is contaminated, it's done. So I think a face shield is a terrific idea. I think it needs to get cooler. Like I said, not a lot of teenagers, I'm sure my 14-year-old would be very upset the fact that we're even talking about her having to wear a face shield. But, I'm sure that's the case with a lot of teenagers. But, I really believe that is going to end up being more popular than a face mask in a lot of situations. And again, the teachers are going to like it better. They can see the kids can speak. And again, if it gets infected if it gets contaminated for whatever reason, you can have an alcohol wipe and wipe it down. It's clean. So I think that as we move forward, and the county is looking at potentially purchasing a large quantity of face shields to assist the school districts in using them. And I think that as we move forward, I think you're going to see more and more gravitation towards that.
All right. And let's patent the windshield wiper inside of it, because I think that'll be very,
for sure.
We might do well on that. And one quick follow-up, only because I spoke to a mom yesterday who's very concerned. Dr. Lambert, can you speak a little bit about our special education program for those kids that, in the same vein of the masks, that are going to have problems? What reassurances are we going to have for the families, for our staff that are going to have one-on-one time with those kids, to making sure that they're safe, everyone's safe, and give me a sense of what we're talking internally about that. And then I'm done. I'm sorry.
The reassurance that I can give is that we are going to do everything we can to make it as safe as possible for everybody that's involved. The supervisors, special ed supervisors and I are already working. We're compiling that we'll be working with Bill next week, compiling supplies that we believe we need in those classrooms that are going to help keep things safety, such as some plexiglass for desks when we have to sit side by side with youngsters who can't comply, additional PPE gear and what have you. And then we also are working on what I'm calling a resource manual at this point, where we will be able to provide with those staff working with those youngsters that, if you have a youngster who tends to want to elope from the classroom, here are strategies that you can use to try to manage that situation. If you have students that are not able to comply for whatever the reason is, here are some of the strategies that we've come up with that you can try to work with the youngsters. So, we will do all that we can to make it as safe as we can for everybody involved.
Thank you, sir, as always. Appreciate your answers. And I'm done. Mr. Block, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Salmon. Ms. McKee.
Thank you, Mr. Block. I'll be brief, as so many of my questions and comments have really already been covered by my board colleagues. I just want to add my thanks to everybody who's worked on developing this plan, and especially thank Dr. Damsker for his time, and for Dr. Fraser, who's kept us so informed, weekly updating us and keeping us in touch with how this plan has been developed. This is just such an awesome responsibility. I mean, we make decisions as a school board around the education of our children, and we know that we have no greater treasure than our children. This decision about how to keep them safe and provide education to them, there just could not be a greater task at hand for us. And I know that each of us takes it very seriously. As Mrs. Brooks said, it's causing us sleepless nights. I fully appreciate parent concerns and staff concerns about the safety issues that we're dealing with. Protecting our students and staff really is our greatest priority, and I hope that everyone understands that in every step we take here, that is the goal. And while we don't have 100% clear lesson plan, if you will, how to achieve that goal, it is our goal, and it's foremost in our mind. I also just want to go back and reference something Dr. Damsker had said earlier. While we are making this plan for the safety and education of our students, and we know it'll impact them, their families, and of course our staff, this plan takes place within the context of our larger community. Everyone in our community has a role to play and a responsibility in keeping themselves and their fellow citizens safe. And I just implore everyone to take seriously any measures that you can undertake to keep us safe, to mitigate factors that will stop the spread of this. And in that way, try to help keep our kids safe. All right, so that concludes my remarks. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ms. McKee. We'll go to Mr. Hidalgo, and then we'll finish up with Ms. Marcel and Dr. Thorwart.
Thank you, Mr. Block. And Mary Ann McKee, very nice sentiments you said there. That's what I thought we should all be focusing on individual responsibility as a community as a whole, and doing everything every day that we can to try to mitigate the risk for our neighbors and our friends and our family and loved ones. This is an awesome responsibility that we have. I'll back up for a second. I just want to thank everybody on the committee, and Dr. Fraser in particular, for leading this charge. This is an amazing time for all of us, and we broke a record with 2,100, 2,200 participants at one point in tonight's meeting. So this is a big deal for everybody in the community. So I respect and appreciate all the work that you've done for us, Dr. Fraser. I hope that Dr. Damsker is still online too, because I've never met Dr. David Damsker, but I'm really appreciative of his common sense approach from a scientific standpoint and with his medical background. Just a little note, when I saw the June 15th memo come out for the guidance of Bucks County school reopenings, I took a sigh of relief in the sense that maybe we can do this, because it's a real difficult thing to get this many children into our buildings with the restrictions that are out there, the suggestions. So I think I'm proud of the work that's been done. I think there's a lot, there's still work to be done, but I think this common sense approach that we have is heading in the right direction. And to speak with something that Ms. Brooks had said, ideally we all would love six desks 6 feet apart. If the classrooms were 40 by 40, we could get 25 kids 6 foot apart, no problem with the teacher in there. Space is the issue. And that was probably my first question that I wanted to just or touch upon, but it's already been answered for the most part. If we are at 88% capacity, we can fit 88% of the kids at 4 feet. Then at 5 feet, 6 feet, are we looking at 50, 60, 70%? I know it's different because every school has different size classrooms, but I too will piggyback to say those numbers would be interesting to see, but I think it's, we would not be able to get all the kids back into school, especially if we can't do A/B days. So Dr. Fraser, just real quick, if we, I have more questions, but you mentioned tonight that we are developing a plan for alternate days, right?
Yeah, hybrid model.
The hybrid model, yeah. So that will be next week that we'll be presenting any of that, or we're just putting it like kind of, we're still devising it and having it. But that
Or yeah, I would say our focus, we're still devising that one, Mr. Hidalgo. I would say that's not one of the one of the top 2 or 3 priorities right now. Refining this plan is working in what's the at-home piece going to look like from a learning standpoint, continuity of education standpoint, and then should we need to shut down schools for, again, a day, a month, what have you, then that still is a separate plan. So right now, that's kind of where our energies are focused. We just, there isn't enough time in the day, as you know, for us to answer all this. And Ms. Brooks asked a question about the 14 states with the recommended quarantining, and that was on our cabinet agenda today. And because of just other pressing issues, we didn't even come to resolution on that. And that's just sort of the state that we're in right now. So I don't anticipate us talking about a hybrid model next week. Perhaps we'll be surprised when we get there. But next week we'll definitely focus on what the learning implications are, both in person and at home.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know it's not enough time in the day to do all this stuff. Thank you. Is Dr. Damsker still here?
I am. I just had to, my phone is dying, so I had to charge it up. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you. I just hope you heard the comments I said about your guidelines. I think they were really good. Real quick, before your phone dies, the contact tracing is something that I'm curious about, from a sense that, let's say you have a positive and then you go and you start contact tracing in school and outside of school. Are you requiring tests to be done when and if they are needed or required, and how about that goes about?
No, once a child tests positive, they normally are clear to come back to school 10 days later at a minimum if they have no symptoms and have had no fever for 3 consecutive days included in those 10. So basically, it's a 10-day. If you get diagnosed on Friday, but your symptoms started on Wednesday, it's 2 weeks from, or it's not 2 weeks, it's 10 days from that Wednesday when your symptoms started. So we do not require follow-up tests because all the evidence shows that you're no longer infectious. Usually it's between 8 and 9 days after your symptoms start. So we go to the 10. It used to be 7, but we moved it to 10 recently when CDC did also. And there's times where we still keep 7 in very specific situations, but there's no testing required in those who are positive, as long as they've waited the 10 days and have 3 days of no fever included in those 10.
Oh, so testing to re-enter school, but what about for contact tracing, what are we doing with the contacts?
So what happens is we put those, depending on the situation, we would put those on a modified quarantine, meaning for the 14 days since the last exposure to a confirmed case, assuming it was a real exposure, and you're supposed to be within 6 feet and 15 minutes, and we'll go through the whole thing. But those people are on a modified quarantine, which means they can only do certain things. Like they can't go to parties, they shouldn't be going out for dinner, but they can still go to school, they can go to work. If they follow the guidelines I mentioned earlier about wearing a mask all the time and doing the symptom screening and some of the things we talked about when people are kind of coming back from those high risk areas. And we've been offered modified quarantine for quite a while now. It's been very successful. It allows people to, if they need to go to work, if they're an essential worker, to do that. And we're going to include, obviously, we've been doing that at camps and daycare as well. We haven't really had many positive cases, so it hasn't been an issue, but we will be doing that in the schools. We're making that recommendation in order to, again, if you start kicking everyone out who may have seen someone who was positive, you end up shutting down schools and classrooms for long periods of time. And then the day they come back, there could be another contact. And then the next thing you know, the school's shut down, for weeks and months. And there's no reason to do that. And especially given the fact that kids, again, don't tend to spread the disease as much as adults, and everyone's wearing masks. And so nobody with symptoms should be in the school. So there's lots of factors that are playing into this that allow us to do this modified quarantine. If that helps. But the contact tracing, we do that. If someone is sick, let's say the first day of onset of symptoms was a Wednesday, we would go back and say, okay, what did you do Wednesday? Where were you? Where did you go? Where did you go? Who did you interact with? On what basis? Were you wearing masks? If you did that, blah blah blah. And we kind of go through that with every case, and we've been doing that, since the beginning, since the end of February when we had our first case, and it's been very successful.
Well, thank you so much, because that clears it up. I'm glad to hear that. One last question, kind of splitting a hair here. Modified quarantine for people who have a mask exception.
Modified quarantine for those with a mask exception could be a little more difficult because one of our requirements is that they do have to wear masks. So if they have a mask exception, they either may not qualify for that modified quarantine and must do it at home, or if there's a situation where they can be in a room and completely social distanced, and there's another option. We would work individually on a case-by-case basis with the principal and the superintendent to go over what's possible. But one of our requirements for modified quarantine is the ability to wear a mask at all times when you're around other people. So again, it hasn't happened yet to us, but if it does, we will work with the school district to see if there's something we can do. And if we can't, then that person would be at home for 14 days.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm not going to take up much more time. Just okay. So basically, I just wanted to close with, I'm concerned for the staff who are older and susceptible, and I hope that we can, make the accommodations and fit within the plan to help them. It's a real difficult situation for people who are in a susceptible age bracket, and that's all I have to say. But I really do feel for everybody out there that we all have someone we love that's in that vulnerable stage. So let's all do what we can to make this work. Thank you,
Mr. Hidalgo. I think we've got one last question from Ms. Marcel. It sounds like a good thing. Sounds like Dr. Damsker's phone is about dead.
Thank you, Mr. Block. I had a question for either Mr. Senko or Dr. Frazier. I just wanted to, I know we've talked about the 3 feet versus 4 feet versus 6 feet, but I was just wondering if you could just share a little bit more with the public on kind of what that means. I know we talked about percentages earlier, and so I just think it's helpful for people to know really, the 4 feet versus, or 3 feet versus 6 feet, like what that really means, because obviously like our schools are different sizes, the classrooms are different. And so I just was hoping that maybe you could just shed a little bit more light on that so that people maybe have a better understanding of why that's really challenging to go 6 feet versus 3 or 4, just to share that. Thank you.
Mr. Sanko, you want to take the lead on that? You're the one who has been championing that work, taking those measurements throughout the district.
Yeah, sure. So I think our starting point has to be, you heard Mr. Stone earlier speak about some of the supplies and some of the assumptions. So the assumptions with these numbers are based on full-size classrooms with one teacher desk and no small group tables. So that would mean none of the semicircle or kidney tables. So by example, our classrooms, based on the square footage, if we were looking at a 6-foot spacing, a 6-foot social distancing, we could fit approximately 8 to 10 students per room based on the school. And that's consistent at our elementary level, middle level, and our high school level. So for example, if you were to look at Churchville Elementary School at a 6-foot distance, based on using those assumptions that I just said, a full-size classroom with one teacher desk, no small group desks, and desks spaced at 6 feet apart, we could fit a maximum of 240 students in that building based on the number of full-size rooms. Using that same school at the 3-foot social distance, we would be able to fit 20 students in a particular classroom, and that range by school is around 16 to 20, again, depending on the footprint of the school. If we work with the 4-foot distancing, center of desk to center of desk, we could fit approximately 22 students in our classrooms. And again, the example at Churchville Elementary at the 4-foot distance, 4 feet from center of one desk to the center of the second desk, would be a total of 528 students. If we looked at a middle school, Holland Middle School, with the 6-foot social distance and desks 6 feet apart in the classroom, using the same assumptions, we would be able to fit 543 students. And with the 4-foot to distance from center of desk to center of desk, we clearly could fit more students in there, about 1,800 students that would actually take us to a larger capacity. And then another example would be Council Rock High School South. With the 6-foot social distancing, we would be able to fit 945 students. With the 3-foot social distancing, 1,226 students. And with the 4-foot center of desk to center of desk to center of desk would be 1,630 students. And again, I know I'm repeating myself, but those numbers are based on the assumption that we're just measuring full-size classrooms. It includes one teacher desk and no tables.
Thank you, Mr. Sanko. That was extremely helpful.
Are there any more questions from the board? Okay, I don't see any. We have one session of public comment before we go there. I think it's probably safe to excuse Dr. Dansker. You made the comment before we started about the late nights, and I believe it was maybe your wife who I saw on there, but apologies to your family for keeping you out so late, but we appreciate it. The public appreciate it. It's very helpful to hear from the local folks what's going on and why some of these guidelines are out there, whether folks choose to agree or disagree. I think it really provides some of the foundation that will help people understand the decision-making process and more importantly, all the work that goes into this. So Dr. Dansker, thank you.
Thank you for having me. And obviously, if there's additional questions that come in, I know me and Dr. Frazier speak relatively often, so we can certainly help address more questions as they come in.
Excellent. We appreciate your leadership across Bucks County in this. Also, thank you to Dr. Frazier and the entire team. It's tough to have to vote on this for sure, but it's even tougher to have to do the work because there's a lot that goes into creating this plan. And I just also want to recognize that the goalposts are shifting almost weekly for you and your team. So I really appreciate what goes into it. And I also want the public to understand that while we might approve a plan in 2 weeks here, hopefully we'll approve a plan, that's just the start of the work. The actual implementation of the plan by the district to ensure safety of staff safety of students, and the readiness to adjust on the fly is incredible. And while it's really, unbelievable that we've got to take 4 weeks to create a plan, it's even more unbelievable to think that, you've basically got 5 weeks to implement it and expect it to be flawless. But I'm confident in the team. On behalf of the board, thank you for what's been done to date and what's coming. And with that, we'll turn it over to public comment. I don't believe there's a ton. There are a bunch of questions that are in there just from a public perspective. We don't typically respond to questions at public comment. If it's something quick, Dr. Frazier, that we haven't covered tonight that you want to try and address, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we'll go for 30 minutes. Based on what came in, I don't believe we'll be at this for 30 minutes. But I also want the public to know that anything sent into public comment is seen by the entire administrative team and cabinet, Dr. Frazier, as well as the entire board. So we all have the ability to see everything in addition to hear it. So Ms. O'Grady, give it to you.
Thank you. These will be read in the format they came in, the most recent, or the earliest to the most recent. So our first comment is from Jerry Lamb. Jerry Lamb writes, I would like to know how you expect children to wear a mask all day in school. Do you think that makes them feel safe or scared? I have a hard time breathing in the mask when I have to just go into a store, but expect them to wear them all day. The science shows that children rarely get the virus, and also science shows that they do not even spread it to people. Also, out of 45 years of research from the CDC and 22 articles I have researched, masks do not even protect you from the common cold or the flu, which, by the way, kills children 4 times more than COVID-19. Children who have severe underlying conditions and older staff members who do not feel safe should not come back. Anyone who wants to wear a mask because they feel safer, then fine, but do not force these children to wear a mask all day. It is bad enough we are being forced, not to mention it is unconstitutional that they will be breathing in their own toxins all day long, not to mention sneezing in them, touching them, and wearing them into the bathroom. It is insane. We never took precautions like this back in 2009 with the swine flu, and that did not infect children. If we follow the science, which we are always screaming about, then we should know that this is too extreme for our children. Please rethink the mask for our kids. It is so wrong for anyone to be forced to wear a mask, especially our children, for a long period of time. If you do, I think it will turn into a real problem. And I told my son, if you are being told you have to, I give you permission to take it off or to pull it down if you are feeling like you cannot breathe. These children need to come back to school without a mandatory mask rule. Make them sanitize their hands more, keep their desks separated a bit, anything but a mask all day. Thank you. And this is from Jerry Lamb. Our next comment is from Bridget Demetsky. To whom it may concern, please offer our school district a dual option come the fall, one with little mitigation and mask optional. The second option, if you need more restriction, is to stay home and do school online. There is no one-size-fits-all answer to this situation. I'm beyond comfortable with the notion that the governor is going to dictate how our children live day to day. Our next comment in was from Jamie Guzzi of Ivyland, who writes, Council Rock schools should reopen in the fall with dual options of either in-school learning with little mitigation or homeschool. If Home Depot can be open, then so can schools. The case numbers are high, yes, but no one is talking about the recovery rate or the death rate. The recovery rate is very high and the death rate is very low. These two should be considered when making this decision. Kids need to be in school. It's mind-blowing that the people in charge of education in our community don't see that. I saw firsthand how hard the homeschool was for my son. He didn't work hard for himself. He's going into 8th grade, and my daughter, who's going into 10th grade, cannot learn math by being homeschooled. The school board needs to do the right thing for our kids. Our next public comment is from Carrie Jordan, who writes, hello, please, please, please do not require masks on our poor children when they attend school. I do not want to send my child if that is the case. I feel like I'm pushed into a corner and have to seriously consider homeschooling for my kids. We all know it is not healthy for the kids to be in a mask. Thank you. Our next public comment is from Christine McKay, who writes, I am writing to voice my opinion that I feel our children should be able to resume school in the fall without having to wear masks or dual option. I am in agreement with putting in place measures for spacing when necessary, but feel overall that masks will be detrimental and not necessary. I also feel wearing masks should be a choice, not mandatory. Our next comment is from Philip Shalane, who writes, given the realistic possibility that the schools may be closed for portions of the upcoming school year, can you please compare the educational experience through the distance learning program that will be offered versus the existing cyber school options? Next, we have a comment from Jessica McNulty, who writes, students do not need to return to the classroom. However, I feel that CR reopening plan just about ignores most of the CDC recommendations for reopening schools. I would like CR to consider a reopening with half the students similar to the New York model. With cases on the rise in most of our country, we need to be forward thinking and to be more cautious and slow going with our reopening. Our next comment was sent in by Stephanie Walensky, who writes, please address the fact that Harvard University announced that all learning will be remote this entire academic year and explain why we are considering returning our children to in-person instruction. Mr. Gerald Fetter wrote, if we are to return to school full staff with 2,000 students in the building, why is it necessary to hold this meeting on Zoom while the people there make these decisions are in the safety of their homes to protect themselves? Our next comment is from Megan Vierick, who writes, if the stakeholders are crucial to the district, parents, staff, students, why were they not on the reopening committee at all? Mr. Bill Walker submitted, I did not see any parent representation on the task force. Why? Egil Vasilakati says, hello, I wanted to ask, will the band practice or resume? Thank you. Our next question was from Nicole Kopstick, who wrote, while watching the meeting tonight, it was very frustrating to hear people repeatedly say that everyone will be masked. Despite the governor's mandate, there are parents that have boldly claimed that they will not require their children to wear masks in school. These parents feel empowered to do so because they do not need to require documentation for exemption. At this point, I beg you to consider that we have people who will not comply with the mandates and safety guidelines, putting your staff and students further at risk. It was so apparent that many of the comments were in reference to the students and completely disregarded the health of staff in school buildings. Our next and final comment is from David Rull, who writes, European countries have successfully opened schools, for example, Germany and Denmark, but the steps they took go far beyond what you are proposing. I've sent more details earlier. Please reassess your plan in light of what did work in Denmark and Germany. And that's our final comment.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. Dr. Frazier, was there anything that you wanted to say or to respond to in there?
Yeah, I just think, clearly, as we saw in some of the survey results and as was just anecdotally noted there via public comment, we have a wide range of opinions on different issues. Mr. Cox, sorry to put you on the spot. Hopefully I'm not too much. We heard a bit in there about refusal to wear masks or that we, even as a school district, should not necessarily follow that order and require our students and staff to wear masks. I know that I worry about that from a compliance standpoint. We've talked about that a bit before. Would you be able to offer some comments to the community on that?
Sure, Dr. Frazier. My opinion is that in a lot of ways, the governor's order made the mask issue easier. I understand that it has you know, it has caused some pushback from members of the community who may think it goes too far, or they have students in their household and in the district who will have trouble with a mask. But as a political subdivision of the state, the school district is required in good faith to carry out that order as best it can. I interpret that order, as you mentioned earlier, Dr. Frazier, to provide that there is obviously a health exception for that face covering requirement. An individual is not required to provide documentation that they do have a health exception that entitles them to not wear the face covering. But I do interpret that order to allow the district at the very least to ask for an explanation as to why someone wouldn't wear a mask. Could the school district go further than that order and you know, require some kind of medical documentation, notwithstanding the fact that the order doesn't seem to contemplate that? That's a tough question. Perhaps it could do that, exercising local control at the local level to enforce a mandate that is more restrictive than what the state is requiring. But that wouldn't be my recommendation either. You know, my general advice to this board with respect to questions of liability throughout this process has been to rely on the expertise of the public health experts in designing a plan and in implementing it. I think that holds true here. If the state is saying people should, students and staff should be wearing masks as a general rule, I think that should be the design, and that rule should be implemented. If the state is also saying that someone doesn't need to provide documentation, I think the school district should follow that guidance as well. I do think the school district, and my interpretation of the guidance is that the district can ask for an explanation for someone who doesn't want to wear a mask, and can decide whether that explanation is reasonable or just sort of arbitrary. But if someone presents a legitimate health basis for not wearing a mask, I think my advice to the district will be to take that explanation at face value, generally speaking. I hope that answers your question, Robert. That was a long answer.
It does. Thanks so much, Mr. Cox. I think that was certainly helpful to me, and I trust that it was to others as well. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Block.
All right. Well, with that, I will conclude our reopening forum. I would note that we'll be back here in a week where we'll be focused on the distance learning plan. A tremendous amount of feedback that we got to the reopening email, and a lot of comments that came in tonight was about distance learning and how that'll work and what the logistics were. This is a large topic. We're going to spend most of our time in the Joint Committee focused on that. So please remember to send your questions and comments into reopening at crsd.org on anything that you heard tonight, positive, constructive, or you know, anything that you want to add, or more importantly, questions that we can anticipate and or build into next week's presentation. Love to thank the almost 600 folks who are still with us, and thanks to the families of the district and our staff for sitting through a long meeting, and thanks to my colleagues. Everybody have a terrific night and a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.